This page is the front cover of the magazine, plain as day. It's shouting about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, guns, gore and dinosaurs. Classic Turok. Looks like it's reviewed inside, which is good because we all wanted to know if it lived up to the hype of the first two. There's also Banjo-Tooie getting a mention. Multiplayer bear-bashing bonanza. That game was massive at the time, everyone was buzzing for it after the original Banjo-Kazooie was such a hit. Pokemon Snap and Perfect Dark are in there too, seems like they're giving tips for those. And blimey, Mario Kart on Game Boy Advance. First screenshot apparently. Interesting. Looks like a packed issue. Even Mario Tennis is flagged at the top. Can't go wrong with a bit of Mario Tennis. ISS 2000 UK review inside as well. Football games were always big business. Yep, typical N64 mag cover from back then. Loads going on trying to grab your attention from the newsstand. This page is the opening welcome page to N64 Magazine, issue 46, from October 2000. Right at the top, it proudly proclaims itself as the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. Always good to remind everyone in it. Underneath the big N64 logo, it lists the team, Andrea Ball as editor, Mark Green as deputy, and so on down to contributors. Standard mag staff roll call. DUK. The main chunk of text explains that at 116 pages, this issue is apparently Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo magazine. They say they get their info straight from Europe, Japan and America, and don't just copy stuff off the internet, which, back then, was a proper dig at other mags. They reckon they're the most experienced Nintendo fans in the business, and you can trust them for info and advice. It's all about being independent and reviewing games early, including games from Japan and America that might not be out in the UK yet. They even claim they'll give an honest review, even if a game is awful, which is what you want, isn't it? Then there's the editor's bit, aim to please, talking about how excited they are about this month's issue. Apparently they've been jigging around the office with excitement. They mention they've got an exclusive review of Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, bragging about guns and gore. They also mention Mario Tennis, saying they queued for hours to get a Japanese copy, and that it surpassed all their expectations from E3. Plus, they're covering ISS 2000 for football fans. Seems like a packed issue. Dour. Below that, in a box titled, Just Look What We've Got For You This Month. They list the features inside, with page numbers. There's ISS 2000 on page 54, Mario Tennis on page 26, Turok 3 on page 46, Planet Game Boy on page 33 for handheld news, Pokemon Snap Maps on page 68, Perfect Dark Combat Challenges explained on page 74, and Banjo-Tooie and Mario Kart 64 bits scattered around. Looks like a pretty standard spread of games for the time, covering the big hitters and a bit of everything else. At the bottom it says next issue on sale, the 28th of September, which is a bit of a blunder seeing as this is the October issue. Someone didn't proofread that properly. Never mind, classic magazine stuff UP. And there's the usual publisher info, Future Publishing, at the very bottom with their website and copyright details. All standard magazine page fluff really. This page is the contents page for issue 46 of the N64 magazine from October 2000. Right at the top it says it's the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag, which it probably was back then, fair play. Looking down, we've got the sections laid out. Planet 64 inches kicks things off at page 10, that's the newsy bit. They're talking about Space World, which was always a big deal back in the day for Nintendo announcements, plus Dolphin, which we all knew was the code name for the GameCube, and the Game Boy Advance of course. There's a picture of a blue Game Boy Color with a Pikachu case, those were everywhere. Pori. Then on page 16, it's Coming Soon section, promising juicy pics of upcoming N64 games. Screenshots for Pokemon Stadium 3, which was always a laugh though, a bit more of the same really. The World Is Not Enough, tie-in game for the Bond film, those movie games were always a bit hit and miss, weren't they? And WWF No Mercy, now that was a proper wrestling game, none of this arcade nonsense, straight up grapples and slams. Anyway, regulars are listed below, information station on page 22 with the UK top 10, and the release list, plus a $5 off a game, always welcome that. Issue 47 is teased on page 112, Dolphin and Game Boy Advance again, seems like they were really pushing those, and Chewing the Fat with Joe and Lara, on page 114, no idea what that is, probably some chit-chat section. Moving over, Advance, section on page 33, all about the Game Boy Advance. Mario Kart and Yoshi's Story are mentioned for it, yeah those were the big hitters to launch with, weren't they? Waru. Then N64 Arena, on page 44, UK game reviews, rated and completed, as they say. Turok, 3 inches is on page 46, billed as The N64's bloodiest game. Turok was always a bit gruesome, wasn't it? Dinosaurs and shotguns. What's not to like for a teenager? ISS 2000 on page 54. World's greatest footy game returns. That was International Superstar Soccer, of course. Konami always made cracking football games. Blues Bros 2000 on page 58. Get on down. Bit cheesy tagline there. Ball games. Finally, Import Arena on page 60 for Japanese and American games. Army Men Air Attack is there. Nuclear Strike with plastic toys, it's great. Those Army Men games were alright for a bit of daft fun. And Doraemon 3 inches on page 61. Atomic Blue Cat from Another Dimension. Doraemon was always a bit weird, wasn't it? For those in the know, I suppose. And that's your lot. Contents page done. Page 4 of the mag, issue 46. Right, let's see what's next. This page is the contents page. Right then, looks like we've got a future look section, teasing some big N64 games. Banjo-Tooie and Rush 2049 are mentioned. Banjo-Tooie, well, we knew that was going to be something special from Rare, didn't we? Rush 2049, always liked a bit of arcade racing. See what they've got to say about that. There's the read a bit. Club 64, for all the questions and that, and a how-to for Pokemon Snap. Probably some maps and tips, good for the younger players. Perfect Dark section on combat sim challenges. Bet that's tough as nails. Tips extra for cheats, always handy. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, that old chestnut. Game On with reader challenges. I'm the Best, to check your scores. Skill Club Millennium for the proper hardcore players. And the Game Directory with all the reviews. Oh, and reviews of Turok 3 and Mario Tennis in this issue. And Mind Games with developer insights. Should be interesting to see what they're thinking. All the usual bits and bobs you'd expect from N64 Mag, really. October 2000 issue. Blimey, time flies. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie. Right then, finally some decent games coming to the N64, thank goodness. It's titled Banjo the Bear, and it's previewing the game. There's a little INFO burst bit that says it's from Rare, which we already knew. Cart size is 128 megabit, yeah, that's a biggie for the time. Says 1 to 4 players, no controller pack needed, but expansion and rumble packs are a yes. Transfer pack is a no. It's marked for release in November, in the UK and US anyway, Japan's TBA. And they've given it a full 5 red circles for anticipation, so they're clearly excited about it. They're saying Banjo-Tooie is massive, even bigger than Banjo-Kazooie, which was already pretty darn big. They reckon just one industrial level is a quarter of the whole Banjo-Tooie cart. Bit of hyperbole maybe? We'll see. They're making comparisons to Donkey Kong 64, talking about controlling multiple characters, like how Kazooie can fly now after leaving Banjo's rucksack. Mumbo Jumbo can wander around outside his skullhouse too, apparently. They mention a 4-player deathmatch mode, and other multiplayer bits and bobs, like sack racing and crocodile footy, which sounds a bit bonkers, even for Rare. There's a picture of Weldar, this mechanical boss, who doesn't look too chuffed, and another screenshot comparing the lava levels to Mario 64, saying they've come a long way. In the This Month bit, Banjo-Tooie gets a 6, and San Francisco Rush 2049 gets an 8. Bit harsh on Banjo-Tooie maybe, it's just a preview though, isn't it? Still, Rush 2049, that was a laugh in the arcades if a bit mental on the N64. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, as you can clearly see with that massive title. It's previewing the game and calling it a rich project, which it certainly was shaping up to be. They're showing off screenshots of Mumbo transforming Banjo into a T-Rex in Pterodactyland. Classic Mumbo magic that was. There's also talk about Chuffy the Steam Train, which looked pretty impressive at the time, and they're hinting at loads of secrets in the game beyond what we already knew from Banjo-Kazooie, like Shark Food Island and Gobi's Cave. Apparently the Jinjos are back and more important, and even Banjo's getting proper speech rather than just grunt sounds, which is a bit of a change. They even mention a deathmatch mode, which was a new thing for Banjo at the time. Sounded a bit strange, to be honest, for a platformer, but we were curious. There's a screenshot of underwater bits. Kitty from the mag seemed well impressed with them at E3, and Banjo's egg spitting is compared to DK64's coconut gun, showing off the new moves then. Foray. They reckon Rare, being the geniuses behind Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64, will deliver a top-notch platformer. No surprise there really, given their track record. And they're promising even more about Banjo-Tooie next month, with more bear/bird puns apparently. Can't wait for those. It was October 2000 when this came out. Good times. Massive hype for this game back then. This page is all about San Francisco Rush 2049. It's a future look, so it's a preview of the game. They're calling it a futuristic racer, naturally. There's a box labeled Info Burst with all the game stats, like it's from Midway. The cart size is 128 megabits. It's for 1 to 4 players, and it's compatible with the controller and Rumble PowerX. Obviously everyone had those. Expansion pack is a no, and transfer pack is also a no. It says it's out in November 2001, with anticipation rating at 4 red blobs. Pretty good hype then. The article itself is raving about the game being set in San Francisco with mad roller coaster roads and jumps and that. They reckon it's a superb setting for a racing game, talking about neon cityscapes and 100 feet high ramps. They're saying if you go off-road you'll find loads of hidden areas like parks, and even lava pits, which sounds a bit daft but whatever. They mention glass flyovers and glowing tunnels, making it sound properly over the top, future-y stuff. New. Warranty. There are a few screenshots of the game. One shows a car upside down after going off a ramp, classic Rush physics then. Another shows a train on the track, which they're joking about being on time. Typical British humour, eh? There's another with a car in water, and another showing nighttime tracks, saying they're eye-watering. They also mention shortcuts across water are pointless. Sounds like they're trying to make it sound really wild and varied, which Rush games usually are. They're going on about mastery of side streets, and that you'll uncover enormous worlds off-road. Standard preview stuff, hyping it up. But Rush games were always good for a laugh, so I reckon this one will be a decent racer. This page in Future Look gives us a peek at San Francisco Rush 2049. It's set in the future, obviously, and they're saying it's meters high with interactive scenery, explodable cacti and stop signs you can shunt about. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? They're banging on about the handling, saying you can power slide and do 180 turns easily, even drive on 2 wheels. Italian job style they call it. Bit much again. There's something about retractable wings too, for flipping in mid-air. Seriously? They mention speed strips for a boost, and are talking about the AI being nerve-shattering, and a gloriously over-the-top stunt mode. Midway are only planning 6 tracks apparently, which is a bit stingy, but they reckon it will take months to finish the game. It's meant to be out in November, which isn't too far off. They've got little captions on the screenshots too, things like, you won't be seeing much of them in the actual race, and use the car's wings to avoid a nasty end. A little map in the corner is supposed to show the track length apparently. It's all sounding a bit daft and arcade-y, but Rush games always were, weren't they? Bonnet bashing action come November, they're saying. Sounds like they're looking forward to it then. This page is the Planet 64 News Desk section, talking about all the exciting stuff coming out of Space World 2000. It's all about the new games being shown off for the N64, Game Boy Color, and the brand spanking new Game Boy Advance. They're saying Space World will be over by the time we're reading this, which is fair enough given magazines and print deadlines. Sounds like Nintendo had a good showing lined up. Apparently Mario Party 3 was a surprise, popping up out of nowhere. Can't say I was exactly blown away by another Mario Party myself, but they sold like hotcakes, didn't they? And it seems Mario Kart Advance for the GBA was already looking pretty slick. AK. The article highlights Sin and Punishment, reckon they think it's going to be a real system seller, even saying it could blow away Lilat Wars, which is fighting talk. It's described as a futuristic anime-themed shooter, combining elements of Lilat Wars and Jet Force Gemini. Sounds promising, and the screenshot does look pretty intense. Then there's a confirmed lineup section, listing a load of games coming for each system. For the N64 there's Mario Party 3, Banjo-Tooie, Mickey's Speedway, always a bit of a cash in those Disney racing games, weren't they? Disney Dance Revolution, Mega Man 64, Mysterious Dungeon 2, Custom Robo 2, Echo Delta, Leader of Animals and Animal Forest, Sin and Punishment, Ultimate War, and Shuren's Castle. Animal Forest, or Animal Crossing as we know it now, being described as a communication game where you chat to animal villagers. Bizarre. But Shigeru Miyamoto was apparently excited about it, so it must be good, right? Game Boy Color's getting a stack of stuff too. Dance Revolution 2, Donkey Kong Country, Pokemon Puzzle League, Zelda Triforce Series, Mario Tennis, Mega Man X, Harvest Moon 3, Puzzle Bobble Millennium, Disney Popper Music, Pocket Puyo Puyo, and Zona, Mystery Man. Plenty to keep you going on the go, especially if you were into your handheld gaming. Eka. And for the Game Boy Advance, they're listing Mario Kart Advance, Golf Master, Konami Wacky Racing, Kuru Kuru Kururin, Golden Sun, and Napoleon. Golden Sun was definitely one to watch out for. Proper RPG on a handheld. That was a big deal back then. Pala. Right at the end, there's a bit about Dolphin which we now know as the GameCube, and the rumor mill suggests Miyamoto might be showing off Mario and Zelda demos for it. They're even hinting at a next-generation wave race. Bit of a tease to get everyone hyped for what's coming next. And it sounds like they're gearing up for a massive Space World blowout in the next issue. Good times. This page is all about the buzz around Nintendo's next console, Dolphin, and it sounds like Space World is the place to be to find out more. Apparently, rumors are flying around, and they're hotting up. They reckon Nintendo is going to keep Dolphin secret until Space World in Japan. Word is, they're calling it Star Cube, which is a bit of a naff name if you ask me, but there you go. Paynolta. They're raving about the Dolphin controller, saying the development kits have been sent out, and insiders are saying the graphics will be top-notch, even better than that PlayStation 2 thing. Apparently developers are saying they can get visuals 10 times better than Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PlayStation 2, which sounds like a load of marketing spiel, but still, you never know. Then there's this funny bit where the Nintendo boss, Yamauchi, is saying Dolphin is taking a backseat to the Game Boy Advance in Japan, which is a bit of a surprise in it. He's talking about focusing on handhelds, because the home console market is too competitive. But then Minoru Arakawa is saying PlayStation 2 games aren't selling well in Japan and Nintendo's got better software prices, so they're still confident. Seems like mixed messages coming out of Nintendo, doesn't it? They reckon they'll have the full Dolphin story after Space World next month. There's a Dolphin Speak section explaining polygons. For those who aren't in the know, it's number 10 in their jargon guide, all about how 3D objects are made of polygons, and the more you have, the more detailed the graphics. They use F-Zero X and Perfect Dark as examples, which is fair enough. Jai. Over on the left, there's a PokeWatch bit about the new Pokemon movie, the second one, The Power of One. Apparently it's packing cinemas out, and they mention Christina Aguilera, NSYNC, and Kobe Bryant being involved, which is a bit random. And then there's Poke Burger Part 2, about Burger King doing Pokemon toys again, this time with interactive 3D cards in the kids' meals. You slot them into a base, and they light up apparently. You gotta catch 'em all, as they say, even if it means eating loads of burgers. Finally, there's a picture of Space World, with massive crowds checking out 100 playable Game Boy Advances. They reckon crowds will flock to the show, and it looks pretty busy in the picture, I'll give them that. This page then, we're on page 12, and it's all about competitions and Pokemon, naturally. At the top there's a piece called Blood Money, about the Gameplay UK Console Championships, and blimey, they're throwing about some serious cash for GoldenEye players. Apparently, all the regional heats for the GoldenEye tournament have been done, and they're down to the last few wannabe 07s who are fighting for a slice of a £15,000 prize. Some chap called Andrew Thomas already pocketed £250 for winning a Welsh heat. Not bad going. The finals are at Live 2000 at Earl's Court, if you're interested in watching blokes duke it out on the N64. There's also mention of another heat in London on September 9th for those still thinking they're hot stuff at GoldenEye. A grand total of £1,000 is up for grabs in the final itself. It's mental how popular GoldenEye still is, even though Perfect Dark is just around the corner. Proper tense times for Bond fans back then. Then we've got PokeRom, about Pokemon educational CD-ROMs from the States. Apparently they're teaching kids maths and literacy with Pikachu and co. They've even got a multiplayer quiz and a visit to an observation lab, whatever that is. Sounds a bit naff, but hey, if it gets kids learning. Next up is Pokecheese, which is a bit of a weird one. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese have got Pokemon all over their website. Apparently you can print off a grid to draw Marill and do a Poliwhirl sliding block puzzle. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese and Pokemon, an odd combo, but who am I to judge? Kids love Pokemon and cheese, I suppose. Jewey. Lastly there's Dome Sweet Dome, and this is about a Pokemon event at the Millennium Dome. Of course it is, everything was at the Dome back then. It's called the Pokemon Adventure, a 3-day special in September. Nintendo and Wizards of the Coast are involved, so expect it to be massive. They're gonna have Pokemon trading card game stuff, Pokemon Red and Blue on the go, and loads of giant cuddly Pokemon bouncing around. If you're between 5 and 15, and drag a parent along, you can get in cheaper than normal, saving a decent chunk of money on the usual Dome prices. They even give a phone number to book tickets, and you're supposed to yell, "Pokemon Adventure!" when you call. Bit cringe, but alright. They reckon thousands will turn up, so best to book quick. And apparently, the Pokemon UK Championship final is also happening at Live 2000, so you could watch that too. Busy times for Pokemon fans. This page showcases the new goods section from Planet N64 Magazine. It's all about stuff you could buy back then. First up we have a Pokemon badge and magnet molding set, you know the drill, plaster, molds, paint, bit messy but kept you occupied for an afternoon. Then there's a talking Togepi plush. Apparently it chants its own name and reacts to a smack on the bottom, bit weird really. Pokemon skin stickers are next. Reusable temporary tattoos, good for showing off your Pokédex knowledge at school without the commitment, though I remember these things never really stuck for long. Warrant. Moving on we have WWF collector cards, SmackDown and No Mercy flavors, they call them acrobatic Big Daddies, which is a bit of a strange phrase for wrestlers, but hey ho. There's a Pokemon Game Boy wallet, and lastly a Pokemon Sponge Bath Buddy, A Pikachu sponge with a sucker cup for bathroom tiles. They reckon it looks a bit deformed. Well, they're not wrong, are they? Chew. Down at the bottom there's a competition to win a bathing companion. The question is, what should you not throw out with the bathwater? And the options are A, the rubber duck, B, the flannel, C, the baby. Well, I reckon the obvious answer there is C, the baby. Unless you're really not having a good day, then you might consider chucking the lot out, bathwater included. This page is taking a look back at some older games and calling it Retro World. First up, they're on about 3D Monster Maze from 1981 on the ZX81. Crikey, that's going back a bit. They're saying while everyone's playing fancy dinosaur games on the N64 like Turok 3, it's worth remembering the proper old-school dino chasing with this very basic 3D maze game. They even show a screenshot of that blocky Tyrannosaurus Rex. It was terrifying back then, honest. The text on screen, "Run, he is behind you," was enough to make you jump, even with those basic graphics. They reckon even the humble Game Boy Pocket could run rings around the ZX81. They call it simple but gripping, and say modern heavy games could learn a thing or two from its simplicity. Blimey, bit harsh on Turok there, but fair enough. Monster Maze was proper scary for its time. Then there's a section on the Blues Brothers game, from 1991 on the NES. They are laying it on thick, saying it's hateful, and even worse than the N64 Blues Brothers game they've already reviewed in the magazine. Ouch. Apparently it only had 2 frames of animation for the main characters, and the first level was set in a boring grey department store. They say it was a generic side-scrolling platformer, with enemies in Gestapo uniforms and terrible music. They even mention bouncing spiky green balls and sharks that wander across riverbeds, whatever that's about. Sounds like a right stinker. They finish off by saying the game was the perfect entree for the N64's dire Blues Brothers 2000 game, calling it utter rubbish. Strong words. At the top of the page they've got some Pokemon bits and bobs. Pokemarbles are mentioned. Pokemon marbles are now a thing in America, with creatures inside them and a Matten launcher. Sounds a bit like the marbles we had as kids, just with added Pokemon. Then there's Pokemew. Apparently if you were lucky enough you got a special Mew trading card when you went to see the Pokemon movie. And lastly, Pokerummy, a Pokemon card game with 63 playing cards where you make runs of evolving Pokemon and use a joker to nick cards. So, lots of Pokemon stuff as usual. They were everywhere back then, weren't they? This page is all about Pokemon Stadium 3, or as it was apparently known over here in the UK, Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver. They're teasing us with new picks at the top, which is classic magazine stuff back then, always trying to get you hyped. There's a Q&A section which is a bit cheeky, asking, Stadium 3 includes every Pokemon ever created then? The magazine confirms it's all 151 from Red and Blue and Yellow, plus the new 100 monsters from Gold and Silver. So yeah, all of them, for that generation at least, before they invented loads more. They mention the presentations tidied up, and the Cup, Castle and Gym Leader battles have had a refresh. Essentially it's more of the same Pokemon Stadium battling, but now with the Gold and Silver critters looking a bit better visually. Which is fair enough, that's what we were expecting. The info burst table gives us the basics. It's from Nintendo, 256 megabit cart size. For 1 to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, but rumble and transfer packs are a yes. Release date is TBA for the US and UK, but winter for Japan, which meant ages away for us. They're giving it 5 orange anticipation ratings, which seems pretty keen. Orrington Norker. They're calling Japanese Pokemon fans Pokemaniacs. Very magazine-y. They say we've all been basking in Gold and Silver for 8 months, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but they're saying now we can see those scraps come alive on the N64 in 3D. They mention the UK version is actually the second version in Japan, which is, well, who cares really? It's Pokemon Stadium with the new Pokemon. .ad. They talk about using the transfer pack to bring over your Togepi, Pichu, Marill or Hoo-Hoo, which is Hoot-Hoot by the way, and battling in 3D. They mention energetic, eye-popping attacks borrowed straight from the Game Boy games. Which it is, I suppose, if you're easily impressed by blocky 3D models. Nintendo aren't giving much away, but there might be a big tournament at Space World. And they promise more news in the next issue. Standard magazine fare really, get you interested, and make you wait for more. Oh, and there's a little comment on the screenshots, saying Marill will be walloped by the Psychic Anoon, and Pikachu's been moved over for Pichu, who's apparently far cuter. Each to their own, I suppose. This page is all about The World Is Not Enough, on the N64, and blimey they're really hyping it up, aren't they? Eurocom's Bond effort is getting a proper look in, with claims that it might even give Perfect Dark a run for its money, which is a bold statement back then considering how everyone was still banging on about GoldenEye. They're showing off some screenshots, a castle, a ski chase, and some indoor bits with explosions. Apparently the attention to detail is top-notch, even down to no smoking signs and shimmering swimming pools. Sounds a bit fancy for an N64 game, doesn't it? They're saying Rare will be sweating, which is fighting talk. Weaponry is mentioned too: the Wolfram P2K, Raptor Magnum, Deutsche M45 and the Watch Stunner. They're making a point of the weapon sounds being meaty, which is good to hear after the pathetic popgun sounds of before, whatever they're on about there. The Watch Stunner, they say, is like GoldenEye's laser, but not in name. So basically, it's a laser watch then. Windowcool. There's a bit about the enemies being clever, and the multiplayer being fast. They're also banging on about the reload animations being impressive, like in Perfect Dark. Apparently Bond slides bombs along the ground to take out enemies. Sounds a bit over the top, even for Bond, eh? Right at the bottom there's a little info box telling us it's from EA/Euro.com. It's a 256 megabits cartridge, for up to 4 players, and needs a controller pack and rumble pack, but not an expansion pack or transfer pack. It's slated for November, and the anticipation rating is a full 5 red blobs. Go! Go! They're shouting. Alright, we get it, you're excited. Let's see if it lives up to the hype when it finally lands. This page is all about the new Donald Duck game, coming to the N64. Donald Duck. A duck ready for a roasting? It's a 2D platformer from Ubisoft, and the magazine seems to think it's treading familiar ground, like those old Disney games on the SNES, you know, Aladdin, Tarzan, jumping off shop canopies and all that. They reckon it's got that multi-layered background look that Disney games were always known for, and Ubisoft are using the N64 to make it look proper nice. Gameplay-wise it sounds pretty standard stuff. Run from left to right, jump about, dodge enemies, collect stars. Apparently Donald's got a quack attack and can dip his toes in water for some reason, but they're not exactly blown away by the originality. Visually they're saying it's got a Rayman 2 engine vibe, and the star eyes on the characters are a bit Mario-esque, which is a fair shout. Damn, we'll see. Level-wise there are 24 spread across 4 worlds. City streets, grassy woods, lava levels and all that jazz. Enemies include angry moose and Disney-style workmen with pneumatic drills, and blimey, man-traps big enough for a whole family of ducks apparently. You collect 100 stars for an extra life. Classic stuff. The info burst box tells us it's from Ubisoft. A 128 megabit cart, 1 player only, controller and rumble pack compatible, no expansion or transfer pack needed, and it's out in autumn, with a middling anticipation rating. In the Q&A, they're asking if the lorry chase level is a bit Tarzan or Aladdin, which it sounds like it is. They mention the graphics looking good, thanks to those layered backgrounds. There's something about a train icon showing Donald's mood, which is a bit odd, and they're going on about the old leap of faith in Disney games. They ask about bad guys, level count, and whether you should fight or run in the game, and why Donald is always on rooftops. Right at the bottom of the page, there's a copyright Super Mario Bros. 1982 caption under a screenshot. A bit cheeky that. They reckon Ubisoft is trying to rekindle our love for 2D platforming after being a bit disappointed with Kirby, so we'll have to see if they manage it. This page is all about WWF No Mercy for the N64, which, back in the day, was a massive wrestling game, still considered one of the best even now. They've got a Q&A section dealing with common questions. Apparently the SmackDown Mall lets you spend points earned in the game to unlock bonus moves, and even wrestlers like Dude Love. There are loads of arenas, 10 in fact, from all the big wrestling events at the time like Raw is War and SummerSlam. They're boasting about 60 wrestlers in total, including all the big names from the era like Kane, Mr. Ass, Perry Saturn, The Godfather, Scotty 2 Hotty, and Chyna. Plus all their associated groups. Good to know they've confirmed no blood in the UK version. That was always a bit of a thing with games being censored. Perisa. The main article is hyping up the Create Wrestler mode, saying you can change everything about your wrestler, right down to their chin and their costumes. They reckon the move animation display helps you pick the best moves. They also mention the ladder match mode and the guest referee mode, saying they add to the multiplayer fun. There's a little info burst box that says it's on a 128 megabits cart, supports 1 to 4 players, uses the controller pack and rumble pack but not the expansion pack, and it was due out in November in the US and December in the UK. They're clearly excited about it, giving it a really high anticipation rating. It seems they're also chuffed about the transfer pack feature, letting you download stuff from the Game Boy version. Overall it sounds like they were really impressed with No Mercy, calling it possibly the greatest wrestler ever at that point, and reckon it could make televised wrestling obsolete. Bit strong maybe. This page has a look at Aiden Chronicles, an RPG that they reckon is trying to take on Majora's Mask. Bold move that, going up against Zelda at the tail end of the N64's life. They say THQ might even teach Miyamoto a thing or two. Cheeky! Visually they're quite impressed. talking about beaches, castles and forests. Bit much comparing it to Zelda's giddy sense of freedom though, let's be honest. There's a little Q&A bit, saying the combat is stat-based, but not too overwhelming, and it's turn-based with some real-time movement for attacks. Apparently you can even persuade strangers to join your party, just like a proper RPG. They also mention the lighting is real-time, with a day and night cycle inspired by Majora's Mask, with mist and enemies coming out at night. Down the bottom there's an info burst table, classic mag stuff, saying it's coming from THQ, 128 megabit cart, 1 player, controller and rumble pangas are a yes, expansion and transfer pangas are a no. Release date is October for the US, but TBA for UK and Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 dots, so they're clearly quite keen. Agafu. Then there's a section called An Ear to the Ground, which is all rumors and whispers. Apparently, RIQA, that Tomb Raider-like game from Bit Studio, might be going to Dolphin instead of N64, and Resident Evil 0 might be doing the same, moving to PlayStation's original Resi's prequel console. Star Wars: Demolition is still on for N64 though, described as fender-crunching demolition derby. Oh, and they're talking about Stunt Racer 64 again, saying it might become a rental-only game in the US and forget about a UK release. Sounds like a bit of a mess with that one. This page is an N64 special investigation, all about Mario, specifically in sports games, calling it Exposed the Best Sports. It's mainly focusing on Mario Tennis 64. They've got screenshots showing gameplay, and characters like Peach, who apparently has a powerful serve with pink hearts around it. They also mention Catherine, calling her freaky but rather cute, and she's apparently a bonus character in the tournament mode. The big talking point though, is Waluigi. They're introducing him as the new name for evil, Wario's brother, explaining the meaning of his name as a dark version of Luigi. They're describing him as a bit of a menace on the court with his flailing arms and cackling, enough to put anyone off their game, which sounds about right for Waluigi, doesn't it? There's an info burst box giving the lowdown on Mario Tennis 64. It's from Nintendo. A 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no expansion pack needed, rumble pack and transfer pack are yes. Looks like it was out now in the US and Japan, and due in October for us here. They're giving it a full 5 red dots for anticipation, so they were clearly hyped for this one. And at the bottom, they're joking about sending Max to Tokyo to queue for hours to import it. We all remember those days. Importing games early. This page is all about Mario Tennis 64, proper classic that one. Grand Slam it's called at the top, and it's showcasing the basic shots you can pull off. Flat shot, top spin lob, drop shot, smash and power shot, all the tennis staples really. They even tell you how to do them with the buttons. Nice and simple, just B and A mostly. Warrington. It mentions it's been out in Japan already, and is hitting the States. And it's finally coming to the UK in October. They're clearly playing an import version and calling it a special investigation, which is a bit dramatic, isn't it? Says it was the best game at E3 that year in Los Angeles. Bit of hype there, but fair enough, it was good. They're telling you to check out issue 43 for a full review. Down below they're talking about the intro sequence being classic Nintendo, cute and cheesy. And they're having a laugh at the Wario brothers and Luigi being not okay. Seems like they're enjoying the whole thing. There's also a bit about ring shot modes, looks like a mini-game thing, and a screenshot, with Mario looking smug on a rainbow court. Good times. The next page in N64 Magazine is delving into Mario Tennis for the N64. Seems like a bit of a special investigation, they reckon. They've broken down the characters into categories, which is quite insightful actually. First up, we've got the all-rounders, Mario and Luigi, no surprises there. The trusty brothers who are just good at everything, aren't they? Good serves, fast on their feet, apparently even their hair is top-notch according to the magazine. Gay. Then it's the lightweights, Peach, Daisy, Toad, and Waluigi. They might not bash the ball about like Bowser, but they're speedy around the court and can reach shots that the bigger lads can only dream of getting to. Middleweights are next Baby Mario, Catherine and Yoshi. These are the agile ones, diving all over the shop for volleys. Good at stretching for shots after being wrong-footed, which is handy, let's be honest. Following on, we've got the heavyweights, Nef DK, Bowser, and Wario. Power players, they reckon. Smash the ball hard, blast opponents off the court. A bit slow mind, but who needs speed when you've got power like that? Nefty. Finally, there are the floaters, Pata Pata and Teresa. These are the curly ball experts, apparently. They can curl the ball because they lack strength, which is an interesting trade-off. And apparently they're good for the Bowser Castle court because they're immune to the tilting. Clever. Down at the bottom they're talking about bonus games. Battle mode sounds a bit mad. Bowser's court tilts all over the place when you move, making the ball bounce all over. Plus Mario Kart power-ups appear. Red shells, green shells, bananas, mushrooms, stars and even thunderbolts. Sounds like absolute chaos, but probably a laugh. Oh, cool. Then there's piranha plant mode. Piranha plants act like automatic service machines, firing balls at you in random directions, and you have to return 50 of them. They say it's not easy, and the secret is rhythm to avoid being wrong-footed. They've not managed to get past 42 yet, so it sounds like a proper challenge. All in all, seems like there's more to Mario Tennis than just your average tennis game. Plenty of variations to keep you going, it seems. This page is about some of the more obscure characters making their way into Mario Tennis on the N64. Under the heading Old Faces, it's highlighting that whilst Waluigi is the new boy, there's a few older faces returning that some might not recognize unless you're a real Nintendo history buff. First up is Catherine. They describe her as a pink Yoshi-looking character with a sucker mouth, saying most people won't know her. Apparently she was in Super Mario Bros. 2, so a real blast from the past. Quite right too, I'd almost forgotten about her. Warringtondra. Next is Pata Pata, who the magazine correctly identifies as a flying Koopa Trooper from Super Mario Bros. They make a bit of a joke about Charles Martinet's Mario voice when saying the name Pata Pata, hoping it doesn't get changed for the European release. That's a bit of a silly worry, really. Then there is Daisy, who they say is like half of Peach's personality and is there for mixed doubles matches with Luigi. She was in Super Mario Land on the Game Boy, and apparently might have been a princess in another life. Bit dramatic that. Puntio. Finally, there's Teresa, who's a boo. They mention she's from Super Mario World and Super Mario 64. They found it odd that she appears to be female without a bow or lipstick, clearly struggling to understand the nuances of ghostly gender representation. The page also mentions a feature called Caught in the Act, explaining you can play on grass, clay, outdoor and indoor hard courts. Apparently the surface affects the ball bounce. There are also bonus courts based on characters, and winning tournaments with certain players unlocks them. Standard stuff for a tennis game really, but I suppose it's good to point out. There's a section called Chop Chop, which is moaning about how long games take to make these days. They say it took Nintendo's in-house coders and Rare 3 years to write a new game, but Camelot bashed out Mario Tennis in under 8 months. Impressive work, to be fair. They compare it to making a Game Boy platformer, saying Mario Tennis is commendable and hopefully, future titles will be just as prompt and playable. A bit of a dig at Rare there perhaps, who were taking their sweet time with games like Donkey Kong 64 at the time. Rugu. Lastly, there's a bit about a game mode called Ring. You have to shoot the ball through rings to increase the points at stake. Whoever gets the winning shot gets all the rings, and the first to a target total wins. They say it adds a tactical element and makes you think about the killer shot. Sounds like a bit of a gamble as they put it, but could be a fun little distraction. Overall, it's a preview of the quirky characters and features in Mario Tennis 64. Looking back, it was a really solid tennis game, and clearly they were impressed with how quickly it was made. This page focuses on Mario Tennis on the N64, under the heading Investigation. It's a look into what makes this game tick, and it seems the reviewer is quite impressed, calling it one of the most playable and hilarious sports games ever. They're saying it's a welcome change from watching Wimbledon on the telly, offering a much more exciting experience. They reckon the gameplay is deceptively simple but hard to master, which is usually a good sign for replayability. The review highlights the character roster, mentioning there are 16 in total, including 2 hidden ones. They point out that Camelot, the developers, have gone for interesting characters rather than just your average Joes, referencing Harry and Maple from Mario Golf as examples of their previous work. It seems Waluigi is a brand new character created just for this game, which is noted as interesting. There's talk about the sound effects being excellent, using a mix of classic Mario sounds and hilarious player voice samples. Apparently 4-player games can get quite noisy, especially if Baby Mario is involved, with mention of unsportsmanlike victory celebrations and crying from the losers. Sounds about right for a Mario game, doesn't it? Looking at the screenshots, we've got a shot of Wario and Waluigi in one, with the caption mentioning Waluigi laughing and Blue Mario watching in disgust. Typical rivalry stuff. Another caption mentions a new character called Catherine, describing her as an ungainly mover, but still effective. There's also a note about poor Teresa being hard to control, and a comment about DK being a lethal server. One screenshot shows the Kong Court, which is described as being set in a picturesque jungle clearing. There's even a detail about bow-bombs being line judges on some courts, who explode if you hit the ball out a bit over the top, even for Mario, but adds to the chaotic fun, I suppose. The reviewer also notes the anime-style cuts in the replays, which was a bit of a novelty back then. All in all, it sounds like they are really enjoying Mario Tennis, and I can see why. It was a proper laugh with mates. This page is all about the tournaments in Mario Tennis on the N64. It's highlighting the different characters and their victory celebrations. Starting with Mario, it mentions Wario being a bit of a pain at the start of the game, balancing the trophy on his nose, and then disappearing down a pipe. Cheeky. Kong, or Donkey Kong as we know him, is more interested in bananas than trophies, naturally. If you throw a bunch on the court he's happy. Yoshi's just chomping away at everything, including the trophy itself. Classic Yoshi. Gakager. The article goes on about how visually accomplished it is, saying it's even better looking than Mario Golf. They mention nice touches, like the victory celebrations and the characters' pained expressions when they get hit by the ball. Apparently, in doubles matches you'll see the player at the net, and even umpire Mario turning their heads to follow the ball, which is a bit of detail. They reckon it's silky smooth, with no slowdown at all. There's also a bit about the player at the net turning their head to follow the ball, and even Mario the umpire doing the same. They also mention that doing well in every game mode in Mario Golf unlocks Metal Mario, and they're wondering if something similar might be hidden in Mario Tennis, probably Metal Mario again knowing Nintendo. Finally, there's a section on the transfer pack. Like with Mario Golf, there's going to be a separate Game Boy version out next year, so early 2001 then. This will let you import characters created in the Game Boy game into the N64 version for the RPG mode, and you can pit them against Mario and the gang. The transfer pack will apparently unlock 4 new players, and a whole lot of new secrets. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? This page is the cover for the Game Boy section in the magazine. Blimey, remember O'Leary Manager? They're saying it's the best handheld footy game ever. Bit strong that, isn't it? It's got that bloke O'Leary on the Game Boy screen. Must be the manager they're on about. Clever. Looks like they've reviewed WETRIX too, calling it a hippie puzzle favourite, gone portable and lost its good looks. Ha! Also Tokay, saying it's rough and ready racing with road cones to raise. Sounds like a laugh. There's a bit about Game Boy Advance, saying Mario Kart Yoshi Story and dev kits are on the way. Of course everyone was buzzing about the Advance back then. Wonder what Mario Kart would be like on that. And P+ section mentions Warlocked Strategy Spectacular, and Pokemon Yellow. Yup. Yeah, Pokemon Yellow, everyone had that back then with Pikachu following you about. Proper craze that was. Issue 21, October 2000, right then at the start of the new millennium. Simpler times for gaming. And of course Pikachu is there, can't have a Game Boy page without Pikachu, can you? This page is from the Planet Game Boy section, bringing back memories of the mag, doesn't it? They're really pushing the Game Boy Advance here. The first article is Yoshi's Glory. Right from the start they're on about Mario Kart on the Game Boy Advance, which was hardly a surprise given the SNES compatibility rumor mill. Seeing it in action, even on a screen the size of your thumb, was still impressive for the time. They're suggesting we'll be seeing plenty of SNES conversions, probably more than just rumors, and maybe even updated DX versions. Apparently the GBA hardware is surprisingly powerful, capable of matching late 80s and early 90s arcade classics. They even mention Outrun and Power Drift, which would be nice if they ever materialized. Then it's on to Yoshi Story, on the GBA. According to them it's basically the N64 version, squished onto a smaller screen. And the color handling is apparently way beyond even the SNES. Though they do point out that sprites might look a bit chunky when zoomed, because the Game Boy Advance lacks the N64's anti-aliasing. The next bit is CBA Unclothed, revealing the GBA development kit. It's basically a naked circuit board. Not exactly stylish, but it's what developers are using to make GBA games. It's got all the insides of a GBA, plus a serial connector, and a tiny speaker. They reckon this dev kit is going to be a cash cow for some companies, and hope for some proper imaginative games, not just the usual platform clones. Oh, and there's a funny little piece about Pocket Pikachu, supposedly dying after 1,000,000 steps. Some reader emailed in a guaranteed revival method that sounds like a load of rubbish, involving shaking it for 100 steps. Apparently didn't work. Surprise, surprise. This page is all about the handhelds, mostly the Game Boy Advance it seems. First up it's Mario Kart on the GBA, and to be honest, looking at that screenshot, it does look very much like the SNES Mario Kart, doesn't it? They reckon the graphics might get tweaked, but it's definitely Mario Kart on the go. Apparently they are expecting a 4-player battle mode too, which sounds like proper handheld karting chaos if you can get your mates together. Then there's a piece on a game called Warlocked, described as a real-time strategy game for the GBA. Apparently it's already out in the States, and they've got an import copy, and reckon it's really impressive. Typical, isn't it? The UK release is delayed, which they say will probably get lost in the Game Boy Advance stampede later in the year. They mention 2-player maps being hidden, And in the screenshots you can see these little grunt characters chopping down trees to build houses. There's even a tip about playing as the forces of evil starting you off in a rubbish location. Cheers for that. The knee. Finally, it's the results pages for some competitions. Seems loads of people got the Lara Croft debut game wrong, apparently 99% of entries. But they'll pick winners for Mew downloads and certificates next month. There was also a Yellow Peril competition about the most annoying Europopster, and the prize was a Yellow GameStar Essentials pack. Surprise, surprise. The winners of that are listed: James Cook, Matthew Davis, G. Bruce, Ray Doyle, Martin Allen, Stephen Wilkes, Molly Thompson, Oliver Barnes, someone with no name, and Stuart Cuthbertson. And lastly, there was a Not Afraid to Cheat competition, where you could win a Blaze Exploder cheat cartridge. The winners of that one are Ellie Thompson, Chris Corcutt, C. Williams, Alexander Chidichimo, Stefan Greco, Shani McLaughlin, Bridget Goddard, David Peacock, Rebecca Burns and Tony Carson. Well done to all of them, I suppose, for cheating, or admitting to wanting to anyway. This page is a review of O'Leary Manager 2000 for the Game Boy Color, back in the day when handheld footy management games were a bit of a novelty. It's from Ubisoft, and cost £25, which was a fair whack for a Game Boy game at the time. The review talks about formations being important, and mentions using a 352, and then switching to a 343 to get some goals. There's a screenshot showing the team lineup screen with player names like Hegsby, Witziger, Guardiola. Probably not the real Guardiola, mind you, this is Game Boy Color. It mentions you can manage team training, transfers and balance the books. All the usual management stuff. It compares the controls to classic Amiga footy games like Kickoff and Sensible Soccer, which is a good benchmark for simple and effective gameplay. The verdict is pretty positive, calling it a pocket-sized friend that truly deserves the football game title. The reviewer seems impressed with the depth and realism, even on the Game Boy, and says it's got good passing and a simple 2-button control system. They even joke about scoring belters worthy of a slow-mo replay, which is funny considering the Game Boy Color's screen. There's also a section called Wild Rovers, which looks like a little playthrough diary. It follows Blackburn Rovers, and talks about a lucky 21 win against Bolton, needing to sign star players, and mentions signing some Spanish player into a 352 formation. They then sell Blake to Spurs for £9.5 million, and sign Barcelona's Luis Figo. Imagine Figo on the Game Boy Color. Later on, they sell some players and sign Albertini, Van der Sar, and even Ronaldo, making out they've built a super team. It's all a bit tongue-in-cheek and typical footy manager game bragging. Overall, it's a positive review for O'Leary Manager 2000, highlighting its depth and gameplay on the Game Boy Color, comparing it favorably to bigger console management games of the time. It seemed like a decent handheld footy management option for back then. The next page here is a review for a football management game, the 2000. Seems to be pretty comprehensive, listing all the major European leagues, even the Dutch leagues, which, let's be honest, not many people bothered with back then in games. They reckon it's quite easy to beat the computer, even on the hardest setting, which sounds about right for a lot of these management games. They do mention the 2-player mode being a good challenge though, if you could find a mate who was also into this sort of thing. There's talk about training players to improve their stats, and not overdoing it so they don't get injured. Standard stuff really. The academy system is mentioned, for when your first team gets battered with injuries, but they don't sound too optimistic about the youth players being any good. Transfers are key apparently, and you need to be quick to snap up the best players if they become available, selling off reserves to fund it. Budget management is also mentioned. Don't go bust, basically. Bin there. They've given it a 5 out of 5 star rating, which is pretty high praise. Seems like they're enjoying it more than the FIFA games, which is a bold statement. FIFA was king back then. There's also a little tip about thin squads being prone to injuries and needing rest, and a story about winning the Cup Final 70 against Leeds and getting the manager sacked. Bit harsh. And finally, a note to check post-match stats. Standard football management game stuff really, but sounds like a decent one for the N64 if you were into that sort of thing. This page has a couple of Game Boy Color reviews, let's have a look. First up is The Road to El Dorado, based on the Disney film. It's a 2D platformer. Nothing groundbreaking there, Disney churned these out back then, didn't they? The review reckons it's alright if you like that sort of thing, finding map pieces in each level, playing as either Tulio or Miguel. They give it a 3 out of 5, saying it's a bit tired, and nothing new really. They mention enemies are easy to kill, and there are vines and waterfalls, typical platforming stuff. Screenshot shows the fellas on clouds, bit Mario-esque that. Then there's Witrix. Now this is a bit different, it's a puzzle game from Infogrames. They call it the spaced out hippie of puzzle games, which is a funny way of putting it. Apparently you're making lakes to collect water blobs falling from the sky using bricks. Sounds a bit bonkers when you describe it. They mention earthquakes and fireballs. So it gets a bit hectic. Graphics are grainy on the Game Boy Color apparently, and processor creaking. Not surprising really, it's a handheld after all. They give this one a 3 out of 5 as well, saying puzzle hippies will like it, but it's a bit confusing to understand. Screenshot shows some colorful isometric blocky lakes. Color scheme is apparently vile according to the reviewer. Strong words. This page showcases a couple of Game Boy Color reviews, proper retro stuff. First up is Hype, the Time Quest. Looks like a Zelda-like game at first glance but morphs into a platformer, apparently a bit like Road to El Dorado, which itself is a bit like Aladdin. The reviewer reckons it's not winning any awards for originality, bit of a cliché then. It's about Hype trying to defeat the Black Knight, standard fare. Apparently the characters are Playmobil figures, which is a bit of a weird concept even back then. The review says the platforming sections are decent with good graphics and varied locations, but it's still nothing special, especially for a Game Boy game, and they gave it a 3 out of 5, so middling then, nothing to write home about. Barrel. Then there's Tokei Touring Car Championship for the Game Boy Color. This one is from THQ, and seems to be a decent racer. Reviewer mentions cones, pedestrians, speed bumps, traffic lights, the usual annoyances on the road, but in the game, you can plow through cones with satisfaction. They say it's like Mickey's Racing Adventure, in perspective, and the cars power slide with smoke effects, which sounds alright for a handheld. The reviewer highlights the races being physical and competitive, which was a bit unusual for Game Boy racers at the time. They also mention traffic jams and rough computer cars, and that they flattened a few cones in frustration. It got a 4 out of 5, so a decent handheld racer then. Might have been worth a look. This page is all about cheat codes and tips. Proper old school magazine fodder this is. At the top there's a Pokemon Yellow guide section. It's telling you how to evolve your Pikachu into a Raichu by trading it to red or blue and using a Thunderstone. Classic stuff if you wanted a Raichu back then, as Pikachu famously wouldn't evolve in yellow normally. It also gives you a few actions to try with Pikachu to get a reaction, like talking to it after a battle, or catching another Pikachu. Simple things really, but kids lapped this info up at the time. There's a little Jigglypuff thing too, mentioning poo poo poo, probably just a sound effect from the game. These magazines love to point out little bits and bobs like that. Moving down, there's a section on Driver for the Game Boy Color. Seems to be a guide to the missions with sneaky passwords. They split it into Miami, Los Angeles and New York, listing numbered missions for each city like Bank Job and Bait for a Trap in Miami, Trash Cheese Wheels in Los Angeles, and Grand Central Station in New York. They've got little icons next to each mission, which is a nice visual touch, showing you what type of objective it is. Bit of text saying, see the underworld with these codes and ram him. Wonder what that's about. Probably some in-game effect. Lastly, there's a wacky races cheat code section for the game based on the cartoon. It lists a load of cheat codes, all these letter combinations like BLDFMTZNS and TDHZGBB, unlocking different vehicles like the Crazy Cup, Mean Machine, Varoom Roadster and so on. They mention Muttley unlocks everything, which everyone would have wanted to try to get all the cars. There's a screenshot showing Dastardly and Muttley in the Choose Your Racer screen, and another bit showing Oregon, Michigan, Hawaii on a rock sign. Typical wacky races silliness, setting races in daft locations. Good times, simple cheat codes, good simple fun. This page is the Planet Guide section, focusing on cheat codes and high scores. We've got Crazy Castle 4-level codes, for those struggling with Bugs Bunny's latest adventure. Remember these handheld games? Simple but addictive. They've listed a load of codes to skip levels, handy if you got stuck. Then there's a codec surprise for Metal Gear Solid. It says to call 140.07 on your codec after finishing the game and starting a new one. A bit cryptic, typical Kojima, but worth a try for any Metal Gear fan. Next up is Grand Theft Auto's secret names. Apparently renaming your character unlocks treats in the game. Levels unlocks later levels. Wendy, if levels doesn't work, Full gives unlimited ammo, and Sumner changes something. They've even got a little screenshot of the rename screen showing Christy as a name, and another showing Kelly Brook with the text, Kelly's name to this to unlock new characters. Bit cheeky, but classic GTA, innit? Chorinu. Finally, there are high score tables. Pokemon Pinball Red and Blue scores are listed with names like Zamir Bandali, Josh Matthews, Robbie Klein, Oscar Sheffick and Sui Ling Kao. Mario Deluxe Challenge scores are there, James Holt, David Noble, and Ian Shaw. Tetris DX, 40 lines and Ultra scores are shown with Alan McMonagle topping quite a few tables, alongside Richard Ford and Nick Beck. Marathon Mode scores are listed too. And lastly, Game & Watch Gallery 3 scores for Mario Bros, Egg, and Turtle Bridge, Jonathan Dehn, Rachel Shepard and Lee Madden are amongst those listed, so if your name's up there, well done to you. If not, better get practicing. They are even asking for new high scores to be sent in to Planet Game Boy magazine. Remember writing letters in? Those were the days. This page is the Game Boy Gallery, a regular feature in the mag where readers send in their snaps taken on the Game Boy camera, that bonkers little add-on. At the top we've got a winner, some lass called Katie Buck who sent in a picture of herself in moon pajamas and a beard. Bit strange, but each to their own I suppose. Then we've got a load of reader submissions. First up is a picture of a ghost, or maybe a radioactive potato, according to the magazine, sent in by Stuart Randall. Next, David Vincent's Pikachu, some sort of Pikachu shoe combo, very amusing indeed. Then Adam Worsdale's picture of a bloke with a terrible haircut. They're not holding back, are they? Eskil Vestra is showing us the hazards of living in Norway, whatever that means. Looks like a blurry face. Tom Rollett's Pee Wee Herman is described as sinister. Fair enough. Pee Wee was a bit weird. Ed Younghusband sent in a flickbook animation. Sounds like a lot of effort for the Game Boy camera. Adam Redford spotted a creepy character near Macclesfield. Another blurry face. These Game Boy camera shots were never pin-sharp, were they? Dave Fryer's picture is like a face carved into a chalky hill. Quite unusual, that one. Ricky Collier's effort is just described as the worst thing ever. Harsh but fair. It is a bit rubbish. Nick Alexandro's picture is of a truck from Jim Boomba in Australia. Crazy Aussies, they say. Jack Newcomb's picture looks like someone vomiting in a general direction. Classy. Seri Anson of Milan has snapped a meowth in a car squint and you can just about see it. Battlestar Galactica's Daggett has sent in a lumpen freak. An early 80s robot hound, alright. Sean Pindar's Area 51 brain mutant thing is described as spooky, and Florian's dog making an unusual noise gets a mention too. At the bottom they're encouraging readers to send us your freaks, and they're in association with Joytech, who made all sorts of peripherals back then. You could win an action pack, which was a pretty decent prize. They want you to get creative, print your pictures and post them in. Good old days of physical post, eh? They'll print the best ones, and you could win an action pack. They give an address in Bath for sending your pics. It's all every month, only within the pages of N64, so this was clearly a popular section. Game Boy camera fun for all. This page is an advert for the N64 Magazine Tips helpline. Remember that phone number? 09 0646 64447, open from 8 AM to 11 PM, 7 days a week. Back then, if you were stuck on a game, you could call this helpline to get tips on titles like Perfect Dark, still a classic, Donkey Kong 64 with all those collectibles, Zelda, Ocarina of Time of course, Pokémon Stadium, GoldenEye 007, Jet Force Gemini, Super Smash Bros., and even WWF WrestleMania 2000. A decent selection of games there. They've even got a couple of the Jet Force Gemini characters there, and a screenshot from Ocarina of Time, showing Link battling a Dodongo. Good times. Calls were £1.50 a minute, mind you, and you needed permission from the bill payer. They promise to help you out, and even call back if they can't answer right away. There's also a fax and a ring number if you had problems with the service. This page is a belter. It's the cover of issue 46 of N64 Magazine. Right in the center we've got the mighty Turok 3. Shadow of Oblivion staring right at us, teeth and all. The final N64 Turok bows out in impressively gory style, it says. Yeah, Turok was always about dinosaurs and blasting, and they weren't shy about the claret in those games, were they? Good times. There's a little exclusive sticker up in the corner, next to a screenshot of some monster munching on a bloke. Lovely. Bukaskowu. Then we've got other games getting a shout out. ISS 2000, Konami's footy game, asking if it's better than the previous ones. Blues Brothers 2000, which sounds a bit random. Dancing in the streets or rolling in the gutter, they ask. Intriguing. Army Men Air Combat. Sarge and his plastic soldiers are back. This time flying choppers apparently. And finally, Doraemon 3. The Blue Cat is back. Could it be third time lucky? Sounds like they were running out of ideas a bit with that one, bless 'em. Down at the bottom there's the Ironport Arena section, reminding us about the games coming out in America and Japan. Always good to know what we were missing out on, or what was coming over later. Good cover gets you wanting to read more, doesn't it? This page is breaking down how N64 Magazine reviews games. It's called Viewed, Rated and Completed. Right at the top there's an INFO burst bit, using Metroid 64 as an example. They're telling you the game is from Nintendo, it's a 256 megabit cart, handles 1 to 4 players and uses 20 pages in your controller pack for saves, but no password save, cartridge save, expansion pack, rumble pack or transfer pack. It's listing release dates for US, UK and Japan, April, May and November respectively, and they reckon it'll cost about £40. Standard stuff for back then, keeping you informed. Then they have a section for if you're in a hurry, with pluses and minuses and if you like this bits. Just quick ways to get the gist of the review. Vets. Next up is how N64 scores a game. They're showing their review categories like visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. They've even got example scores using Mickey Mouse 64, giving it a 9 for visuals, 8 for sounds and mastery, 7 for lifespan and a 9 overall. Amazing Mario beating Mickey Mouseathon they're calling it. Bit sarcastic that. Bellet. Giving it. And they explain their scoring system too. 85% and above is a star game. 84% to 70% is just great. 69% to 50% is playable but not special. 49% to 20% is lazily programmed rubbish to be avoided. And 19% to 0% is the disaster zone, absolute wretched crud. Fair enough I suppose, covers all bases. Finally, there's TAM64, it's their Game of the Month picks. We've got Andrea Ball with Mario Tennis, reckon she put a spin on her unique management style. Justin Webb is on Air Combat, apparently driven into shock. Mark Green is on Turok 3, saying, ah yes, Dark Mark has Blues Brothers, and stumbled right into an enemy trap apparently. Martin Kitts picked ISS 2000, becoming a ruthless alien killing machine. Paul Edwards also went for Turok 3, using speedy surfer reflexes. Alan Madrell is back on Mario Tennis. Steve Jalim again with Mario Tennis, body armor boosting him to almost human levels. And Sanshru is on Doraemon 3, with Shakwik and Shaplat. Looks like Mario Tennis and Turok 3 were popular in the office that month. Good games for their time, mind. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 46, looks like it's from the N64 Arena section. At the top there's a previously an N64 bit which is basically a recap of Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. It's got little panels with screenshots and captions, like little teasers. They're showing off headshots, silenced pistols, boss monsters, and shotgun action. Proper Turok fare, nice and gory. One of them even jokes about vegetarian options, cheeky. The main article on the page is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion itself. Acclaim are really pushing it as the big send-off for Turok on the N64. They're saying it's going to be the best of the bunch, bringing together the good bits from all the previous Turok games and adding in loads of new stuff. They sound pretty confident they've got a winner on their hands. It mentions Acclaim in Twycross, and their other Turok games like Dinosaur Hunter, Seeds of Evil and Rage Wars, and even South Park. Seems like they're really trying to make this one special. There's a little info burst box that gives you the details. It's from Acclaim, a 256 megabit cartridge, 1 to 4 players, uses 16 pages on the controller pack. No cartridge save or password save, and no expansion or transfer packs, but Rumble Pack is supported. It was out on September 1st in the US and UK, and was going to cost £50. Games were expensive back then, weren't they? Chew. The article ends by asking if Turok 3 will be a triumph or a disaster. Bit dramatic, but that's magazine writing for you. Looks like they're setting it up for a proper review later on. Yeah, Turok 3, remember that one? Big game at the time, always was with the Turok series on the N64. This page delves into Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, in the N64 Arena section. It's all about what's the difference between playing as Joseph or Danielle Fireseed, the two siblings you can control. Apparently, Joseph's a bit taller, which is important somehow for reaching high places and squeezing through small holes in walls, while Danielle's got a grapple hook. Seems a bit of a basic difference to make a big deal about, but there you go. They're saying Joseph is faster, and Danielle's more about stealth and longer routes. Weapon-wise they both get the same toys, like cerebral processors and silenced pistols, and even fireswarm cannons which sound a bit mental. They reckon the levels are largely the same for both, but if you pick Danielle you'll have an easier time apparently. Good to know if you're a bit rubbish at Turok games, maybe choose the lady then. The screenshots show some in-game action, including a chap being catapulted into the ceiling by a grenade, shades of Dinosaur Hunter they say, and another one shows some heavily armored soldiers, and a trio of those warlock blokes who like throwing fireballs, guarding the entrance to Oblivion's lair. Sounds like the usual Turok monster mash then. It mentions being seconds from the end of level 2, so it's pretty early on in the game they are showing. October 2000, issue 47, if anyone's keeping track. This page in N64 Magazine issue 46 is doing a bit of a travel guide for Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, calling it Wish You Were Here. They're showcasing different level themes as holiday destinations, which is a bit of a laugh. First up is City Streets, painting it as a bustling metropolis, albeit one overrun with demons. Apparently the must-see attractions are rooftop views, disabled shops, and crumbling buildings. To get around, you're advised to pack suntan oil, which sounds like a bizarre joke about the game or reviewer. Then there's the military base, described as having charming spots like the Courtyard of Death and Corridors of Pain. They mention trigger-happy soldiers and an atmosphere of concealed terror, just the ticket for a relaxing break. Apparently, a key highlight is an underwater observatory with a maniating crabtopus. Charming. Travel around the base is on foot, but watch out for pickpockets and armed guards. Classy. Next, we're off to the Lost Lands, steeped in history, but ravaged by time, which is a poetic way of saying it's a jungle. The brochure promises unforgettable views of death by snipers and overgrown jungle, and the aroma of barbecued human flesh. Lovely. They suggest you pack your camera to snap a dinosaur, so that's a plus. Getting there involves heading north and jumping in the river. Sounds like a typical British holiday adventure, maybe not. Finally, they've got fire caves, pitched as a sunseeker's paradise. Apparently, it's hot all year round, and the locals are friendly in a likely to help you fall into lava kind of way. You can expect plenty of lava pits and first-degree burns, but hey, at least you get an all-over tan. The big attraction is a fireworm monster, and the travel tip for this location is a rather unorthodox elevator system, powered by gas vents. Pack plasters for your backside they recommend, which is probably wise. The intro text comments on Turok 3's intro cutscene being impressive, especially the lip-syncing, but notes that in-game scenes aren't always quite as polished. A fair point for the time. Overall, it's a light-hearted look at the levels of Turok 3, playing up the dangerous and slightly absurd elements in a travel brochure style. It's a bit of fun, and certainly captures the tone of Turok games back then. This page then is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Right at the top it has a section called Lava Lamping. Sounds a bit daft, doesn't it? It's basically a guide to getting through a lava level in the game, saying it's one of the trickiest bits. They walk you through 6 numbered screenshots, pointing out things like leaping monsters and enemies that chuck fiery projectiles at you. Seems like they are trying to show how intense and action-packed it is playing through this lava bit, which, to be fair, Turok games usually are. Then there's a bit called Look and Feel, talking about how Turok 3 has these cutscenes and set pieces that aren't just for show, you can actually interact with them. It's broken down into sections like death, destruction, dizziness, and danger. Each one shows a different interactive moment, like getting attacked by little dinos, or watching landslides. It's all about showing off the exciting bits you can get involved in, not just watch. In-game. Finally, there's Friends and Foes, which is about the story and characters in Turok 3. It starts by saying you might think it's going to be like Perfect Dark with loads of people to interact with, but apparently it isn't. They reckon after a bit with some bloke called Otis, the game gets quite lonely. They mention aloof police officers and a half-dead scientist, and say there are fewer and fewer people to chat to as you go deeper into the game. They contrast it with Perfect Dark's missions involving loads of people, saying Turok 3 is more of a solitary experience, which is quite different then. They finish it off by comparing it to Perfect Dark again at the end. Bit repetitive that. This page is all about the weaponry in Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, and it's laid out like a proper weapons guide, which is quite handy if you were stuck on which gun to pick up. They've split it into firing range, detailing the standard weapons, Danielle's upgrades and Joseph's upgrades, showing how each character gets a slightly different take on the arsenal. Starting with the standard weapons, we have the assault rifle, the shotgun, and the grenade launcher, all your usual suspects for a shooter back then. The assault rifle is described as reliable, good for taking heads off, bit gruesome perhaps. The shotgun's a classic, although they say its range is a bit naff and the sound is weedy, hardly the boom you'd expect. Grenade launcher is there for big bangs naturally. Moving on to Danielle's upgrades, we get the Firestorm cannon, which is like a minigun that takes a bit to warm up but then unleashes hell. Sounds about right for a power weapon in Turok. Then there's the Fireswarm, which is a souped UP shotgun that sets enemies on fire. Lovely stuff. The RPG is just the rocket-propelled grenade, nothing too fancy there, but it gets the job done. Gorrington Norsa. Joseph's upgrades are a bit different. Sniper rifle is first up, standard fare for picking off distant dinos. They mention needing a tap on the D-pad to zoom in, bit clunky compared to modern games, eh? The Shredder is next, firing bouncing blue bolts. Sounds a bit silly, but they say it microwaves enemies, so effective if a bit odd. Lastly for Joseph is the Napalm cannon, plants timed mines, bit of a strategic weapon that one. Then at the bottom they go through some of the more cerebral weapons. The cerebral bore, which is as grim as it sounds, burrows into the brain, and spits out gore. The cerebral burst is more primitive, but still blows enemies to bits. And the cerebral processor, which is properly strange, tunnels into an enemy's brain, and you get to control them for 5 seconds but can't attack. Sounds a bit pointless if you ask me, but hey, it's different. Yes, does. Finally, there's a section on the PSG, which they call harking back to the glory days of Dinosaur Hunter. Sounds like you have to collect pieces of this monster to get it. Apparently, it's a super weapon that fires a glowing orb of nuclear power and sucks everything in. Sounds a bit chaotic, typical Turok over-the-top stuff. They warn about being sucked in yourself if you're not careful. Hilarious. Overall, a decent rundown of the weapons you'll be getting your hands on in Turok 3. The next page in the magazine is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, calling it Elevator Action. It seems to be a walkthrough guide for a section of the game. Starting at number 1, it talks about climbing from the subway using electricity cables, which is a bit of a challenge apparently. Number 2 says you're out and need to reach the top of the skyscraper, noting dead bodies that don't decompose well, taking a jab at the game's corpse physics compared to Perfect Dark. Number 3 mentions a locked main door but a hole providing lobby access, saying it's peaceful, maybe sarcastically given the game. Number 4 introduces a bulbous-headed freak enemy, suggesting a pistol headshot is the solution. Number 5 is about the elevator being out of action, so you have to climb through the roof and down the shaft, comparing it to Half-Life in a tongue-in-cheek way. Number 6 mentions another gribbly enemy in the next room, and a switch to bring the power back online. Number 7 is a classic Turok moment. A corpse's leg getting crushed by the randomly moving lift doors, calling it stomach churning. Number 8 describes reaching the top, jumping onto the lift roof, and scampering off before getting crushed. Number 9 says another spidery monster from earlier in the guide appears to congratulate you, which is clearly sarcasm, and tells you to kill it. Finally, number 10 describes reaching the Oblivion creation, guarding the rift between Earth and the Lost Lands, telling you to start shooting. So it's a step-by-step guide for a specific elevator section in Turok 3, with a slightly sarcastic and humorous tone, highlighting some of the game's quirks and enemies. It's classic N64 Magazine style, being informative but also having a bit of a laugh. This page is all about Turok 3, boasting about its game over sequences, or ways to die, which they describe as eye-wincing. They've got 6 examples, like being minced by a robot minigun, falling into lava from a geyser lift, or getting melted by a boss's green goo. Pretty graphic stuff for the time, even for Turok. There's a bit about sniper sports, highlighting how upfront Turok 3 is showing character faces in a first-person shooter, and that sniping can result in a blood-spurting stump, where an enemy's head used to be charming. The Attract Mode section mentions the level of detail in Turok 3's worlds, things like rats chewing on remains and electrical storms, comparing it, maybe a bit unfairly, to Perfect Dark, and saying it's not quite as convincing, but still eye-pleasing. A bit of a backhanded compliment, that. Beasing. Then there's a section on visuals, saying Turok's distance fogging is gone, which is a plus. They mention the visuals are a nod to other games, like Zelda's Grapple Hook, Quake's Alien Factories, Resident Evil 2's characters, and Half-Life's civilian AI, all big hitters at the time. They reckon Turok 3 tries to be like Perfect Dark in realism, but ends up falling into the same old Turok trap of lava caves and bug-like aliens. They admit it's a welcome change from Turok 2 though, so it's not all bad. They seem a bit conflicted, praising parts while also pointing out where it's perhaps not as groundbreaking as it thinks it is. This page reviews the multiplayer aspect of Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, and it sounds like they're a bit on the fence about it compared to the earlier Turok games. They say knocking points off the deathmatch mode is fair enough as the default options are a bit daft, and messing with the rules can ruin it. Ammo being scarce, and the axe not feeling as meaty as in the first game are also bugbears. However, they do mention the color tag mode as being interesting, where you swap teams often. The reviewer reckons if you fiddle with the options you might have a bit of fun, but you'll likely be back on Perfect Dark's combat simulator within half an hour, which is a bit of a dig if you ask me, Cheshire. There's a section on pluses and minuses, listing good points like it being an immersive experience, plenty of blood, and looking great. On the downside, they reckon it loses something after the 3rd level, the action isn't meaty enough, and they are still moaning about the Perfect Dark style reactivated sights. The If You Like This box recommends Turok 2, calling it a sickeningly violent dino hunting prequel, and giving it a N64 Magazine score of 95% back in the day. They rate the visuals as often utterly gorgeous, but shame about the camp as-you-like animation. Sounds get an 8, saying the music is evocative with plenty of bangs, booms and screams. Mastery gets an 8 too, pointing out Acclaim still hadn't quite mastered the N64 like Nintendo or Rare. Lifespan gets a 7, noting it's big but diminutive compared to Turok 2, and not as tough either. Finally, the verdict is a mixed bag, calling it a real mixed bag of gut-tightening brilliance and abject tedium, and not a match for Perfect Dark, finishing with a score of 82%. So overall, a bit lukewarm on Turok 3 multiplayer compared to Perfect Dark then, which is a tough comparison for any shooter on the N64 really. This page is all about ISS 2000, the latest iteration of Konami's football game on the N64. It seems they're billing it as a soccer RPG, which is a bit of a laugh. Not sure what role-playing elements they're on about in a football game, maybe managing your team's finances or something. Anyway, they're saying it's the start of a new season, so it must be a yearly update type of thing, like they do now. 80 area. The page has an info burst section, which is classic magazine stuff. It tells you it's from Konami. It's a 128 megabit cart, supports 1 to 4 players, and uses 121 pages on a controller pack. Cartridge save, password save, expansion pack and transfer pack are crossed out. Rumble pack is ticked, so nothing too fancy there, just Rumble. It says it's out now in the US and Japan, and sept in the UK, so we'd have to wait a bit, typical. Costs £40, which is a fair whack back then for a game. They've got some screenshots dotted around the page, showing off different bits of gameplay. One is about corner kicks and how the camera angle is different, showing Bob Carlos, probably Roberto Carlos, doing his thing. There's another about one-on-one situations, and another showing a player scoring an own goal and getting grief from his keeper, classic football. They mention new teams, like Hong Kong, and that there are no new goal celebrations, which is a bit of a shame. One shot shows a player lining up a volley, saying the new volley move works a treat, and another shows a bicycle kick in full swing, so it looks like they've added some fancy moves. They're also banging on about new scenarios and slinky Portuguese wingers, which is a bit of a stereotype, but alright. And lastly, a screenshot of the reaction after conceding a goal. They just say, unlucky. Overall, it looks like a decent update to ISS, probably worth a look if you're into your football games on the N64, though the soccer RPG tag is still making me chuckle. This page then is titled A Job for Life, and it's all about the career mode in ISS 2000. They're showing off this created player, Galinho, a Brazilian reserve by the looks of things. Poor sod's trying to impress in a practice match, but he's not even made the team sheet for Saturday. Hard luck, mate. They go on about training exercises to improve your skills, and then bizarrely they're banging on about social life and parties. Bit much for a football game, isn't it? Naturally, injuries come into it, and Galinho ends up crocked. Seems like his career's not gonna plan. Down below they're moaning about the smooth or crunchy graphics hires mode makes it jerky, they say. Even a North Korea against South Korea match looks dodgy in hires. So career mode in ISS 2000 looks alright, maybe a bit too much with the social life stuff, and the hires is still a bit pants. This page is all about ISS 2000, International Superstar Soccer 2000, and how it stacks up. It's not a massive overhaul from ISS 98 apparently, more like a fine-tuning. They're showing off some new moves like the toe leap, which sounds like a fancy way to avoid tackles. Then there's the header animation, which they're calling subtle, twisting headers. Sounds like they're really getting into the nitty-gritty of animations now. Referees are apparently getting a bit more lenient, giving verbal warnings before flashing the yellow card. Bit like real life sometimes, eh? Commentary is getting an upgrade with Chris James and Terry Butcher on the mics, replacing Tony Gubba from 98. They reckon Gubba wasn't that useful anyway, cheeky sods. Leagues mode is new. Finally, you can set up proper leagues with your mates, between 4 and 32 teams, which is a welcome addition for those Friday night footy sessions. Intros are more cinematic now, showing the players walking out like something from Reservoir Dogs, which is a bit dramatic for a football game, isn't it, team? Then there's a bit about lifespan, talking about the career mode from J-League Perfect Striker 2, which was only in the Japanese version before, now in English. They've had a go at it, trying to get a player from reserves to international stardom. Sounds like a bit of a grind, just like real life they reckon. Apparently there's a keeper training mode now too, for those masochists who like playing in goal. Overall, it sounds like ISS 2000 is a decent enough update, not revolutionary, but a solid improvement for the footy fans out there. They say it's not quite worth shelling out another 40 quid if you've got 98, but if you're a diehard, you'll probably want it anyway. Typical. This page is all about ISS 2000, the latest footy game for the N64, reviewed in the magazine. Looks like Martin Kitts reckons it's a decent upgrade from 98, giving it a solid 90%. He's banging on about new faces for player creation and even changing boot colors if you're that bothered. Apparently the graphics are very slick and Highers mode is doing its job. Visuals get an 8. Sound is also an 8. Solid enough. Mastery and lifespan both get a 9, so it's got that classic ISS gameplay that will keep you hooked, especially with the RPG mode, which sounds a bit bonkers for a football game, but in a good way. Overall verdict is fantastic game. He does say if you've got IS98, maybe hold off unless you're a die-hard fan, as it is a full price release. Then the rest of the page is an advert from a shop called Wicked Wear. They're flogging Pokemon Snap for £37.99, and a bundle with N64 and Pokemon Stadium or Perfect Dark for £94.99, which is not bad at all, especially for Perfect Dark back then. That game was amazing. Looking at their N64 game list, they've got everything from 1080 snowboarding and Banjo-Kazooie to Zelda, Ocarina of Time and Perfect Dark obviously. Prices seem alright. You could get things like Castlevania 2 for £19.99 second hand, or Donkey Kong 64 new for £33.99. Lots of Pokemon stuff being advertised too, trading cards and merchandise like Pikachu figures and beanies. Or more. On the other side, there's a load of Game Boy bits and bobs. They're pushing the Game Boy Color with Pokemon Yellow, Red or Blue, with a mains adapter for £79.99. You could get just Pokemon Yellow on its own for £22.99. or a standard Game Boy Color for £58.99. They have a list of Game Boy games as well, proper blast from the past, seeing titles like Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle 4 and Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy. Also got licensed Nintendo stuff like beanies, steering wheels, and rumble packs for the N64, and of course the Action Replay Pro for those who like to cheat. Seems like a pretty standard ad page from back then, trying to sell you the latest games and accessories. This page is an N64 Magazine review for Blues Brothers 2000. Right off the bat, the headline doesn't pull any punches, saying the game doesn't strike a chord. It seems they weren't too impressed, calling it a lardy belly flop of a movie tie-in, shambling from start to finish. They're saying the levels are visually varied enough, swamp, sewers, city, graveyard, prison, the usual suspects back then, but reckons the gameplay is a bit lacking in the creative department. Apparently the puzzles are elementary, and the music is a butcher job of soul classics, even mentioning Otis Redding being butchered. Ouch. There's an info burst box, like they always had, listing the game's details. 128 megabits cart, 1 or 2 players, uses 3 pages on the controller pack. No cartridge save or password save, which is a bit rough, and no rumble or transfer pack support. Looks like it was out in the UK around September 22nd, and cost about £40, which was standard then. There are screenshots dotted around with sarcastic speech bubbles poking fun at the game. Things like, "Don't do it, Elwood. There's another dancing bit soon," and "Elwood hates it so much he removes himself from the game." Seems like they really didn't hold back, did they? Overall, it paints a picture of a game that was a bit of a letdown, even back then. Another movie tie-in that probably should have stayed on the drawing board. We saw a few of those on the N64, didn't we? This page is a review of Blues Brothers 2000 on the N64, and blimey, it's a stinker. Right from the title, I got the blues, you know it's not going to be good. They've broken down a level into sections with numbered screenshots, showing Elwood, the main character, in various clunky 3D environments. The reviewer is clearly unimpressed, calling the hub area unimpressive and a little confusing, and the first room, very bad indeed. Number 4 they reckon is still 2D rubbish, with an atrocious camera. Ouch. There are little speech bubbles from the reviewer, sarcastically describing what's happening in the screenshots, like a scullery maid lobbing stuff, and Elwood getting chased by cops. They've got a pluses and minuses box, and the pluses are faint praise indeed. Attempts have been made at variety, younger gamers will grasp it easily, and the killer, we don't have to play it anymore. The minuses are brutal, rotten, worm-ridden multiplayer, frustrating to play, deeply depressing and absolute pump. Pump meaning rubbish, for those not in the know. In the if you like this box, they recommend Banjo-Kazooie, which is a bit of a slap in the face to Blues Brothers 2000, isn't it? Banjo-Kazooie was top tier, rated N64 Magazine 92% back in issue 18 they say. Sprawling, ingenious and endearing, they call it, and about to be bettered by its sequel. Yeah, Banjo-Tooie was on the horizon then, everyone was hyped for that. Then there's the verdict box, a member of that special league of games headed by Superman. Referencing that truly awful Superman game, another movie tie-in disaster. They say a third-rate movie license is not a license to print money, and conclude under no conditions should you buy this. Strong words. The game gets a truly dismal 28% overall. Alan Madrell wrote the review apparently. Poor bloke probably had to play it. It's called Buster Blood Vessel, multiplayer, and they really lay into that, saying it's a last-minute effort just to put 1/2 players on the box, comparing it unfavorably to Buster Groove. They say there's no sense of rhythm, the routines are rubbish, and it's just a frustrating button-mashing exercise. They even bring up Pokemon Stadium's minigames as being better. That's how bad it is. Worst multiplayer game we've ever seen, they declare. Crikey, Warrington, visually, it gets a 5, sounds a 3, nauseating synth soul classics. Mastery a 2, disgusting camera and multiplayer, and lifespan a 3. Fingers will hate you. So yeah, Blues Brothers 2000 on the N64. Avoid at all costs, according to this magazine. Not exactly a surprise, movie tie-in games were often a bit ropey back then. This page in Import Arena is taking a look at Army Men, air combat on the N64. Right at the top, there's a reminder of a previous review in issue 41. Seems we couldn't get enough of those little green plastic blokes back then. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing some in-game action. One of them has a funny caption about shooting flowers. Typical Army Men humor, I suppose. The review itself is headlined, Sarge and Chums Take to the Air. It seems like they thought after nuclear strike we were ready for more helicopter action, Army Men style. The reviewer, Alan Madrell, reckons it's decent enough, pick up and play controls, varied missions, rescue, protection, all that jazz. They mention the graphics are alright, especially explosions, and the sound is okay, same theme tune as before apparently. There's a little info burst table that details things like it's a 64 megabit cart, supports 14 players, controller pack save, all the usual N64 gubbins. Interestingly, Rumble Pack is a no, and Transfer Pack is a yes, must be some reason for that back in the day. The pluses and minuses bit highlights the good old-fashioned shooting, variety and Cooper's positives. On the negative side, multiplayer is a bit flawed, and apparently the co-pilot in co-op doesn't really do much. Then there's a section if you like this, which points towards Nuclear Strike, reckons it's similar but takes itself a bit more seriously, which is probably fair enough. The scores given are 7 for visuals and sounds, and 8 for mastery and lifespan. The verdict is an 83%, calling it a very good, if slightly retro action game, and definitely worth considering, even if it does have its faults. Alan Madrell signs off at the bottom. So overall sounds like a solid, if not spectacular, addition to the N64 helicopter sim collection. This page reviews Doraemon 3 on the N64, and blimey, it doesn't sound like a belter, does it? Apparently Doraemon 2 wasn't up to much either, and this one's just continuing that trend, getting a rather measly 54%. They're calling it a mediocre Mario clone, which is never a good start. The review mentions it's got big levels, a decent storyline, and you can change characters, so that's something positive at least. But then the negatives come in thick and fast, pop-up and duff scenery, not as versatile as Mario, and just plain not very good. Ouch. Visually and sound-wise it's getting stick too. Shoddy visuals and annoyingly tinky score apparently. Mastery and lifespan get a mediocre score as well. If you're still intrigued, they say if you like this sort of thing you might like Mystical Ninja. That Konami game, remember? They called it gloriously kitsch. Accessibility is a problem too, as it's text-heavy in Japanese, which for most of us here is a bit of a problem. GE. Looking at the screenshots, it's a bit of a jumble. You've got platforming, kart racing, and even a shooting minigame. Seems they've thrown everything at it. The info burst box gives the techie bits. Epoch are the publishers, it's 1 to 4 players, uses a 96 megabit cart, controller pack, and cartridge save. Proper old school stuff. Price is about £40, which for a mediocre Mario clone, sounds a bit steep if you ask me. The final verdict is pretty brutal. Mediocre Mario clone, that should stay in its Japanese home. Doesn't sound like one to rush out and import, does it? This page is from the Club 64 section of the magazine, designed for Nintendo 64 owners. The big feature this month is Pokemon Snap, with Professor Oak ready to give some masterclass advice, so if you were struggling to snap those pocket monsters, this could be handy. There's the regular Club 64 mailbox section, this time focusing on post about Perfect Dark. Speaking of Joanna Dark, there's a how-to guide for Perfect Dark, rise to the challenge and all that, as it was a pretty tricky game on the hardest settings. Tips Extra is the usual tips page. In this case, it's not who you know, it's what. Cryptic as always. Then you've got Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, where the Nintendo attrition will apparently cure your gaming ailments. Sounds a bit daft but might have some nuggets of wisdom. Game On is next, your favorite titles turned on their heads. Sounds like some daft fun. Then I'm the best for your international track and field high scores. Millennium, set yourself apart from the casual gamers, whatever that means. Directory for game info. And finally, details on back issues and subscriptions if you've missed any issues. The date is October 2000, so this is what was current at the time, for the N64. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, always a good read to see what the readers are on about. The star letter this month is from a mean mum in Berkshire, who is asking about Perfect Dark. Bless her, she bought it for her son after reading the reviews, but she's a bit shocked by the gore and wants to know if it deserves its 18 certificate, and if it's as gory as GoldenEye. The magazine folks explain it's rated 18 because of the gore, and that there are options to tone it down with a language filter and paintball mode to remove the blood. They reckon even with the filter on, it's still more gruesome than GoldenEye, and they would have recommended a 15 rating. Parents these days, eh? Then we have the correction corner, always a laugh when the mag gets called out. Daniel from Peterborough is pointing out they messed up tips for surfing Pikachu in Pokemon on page 49 of issue 43. Daniel, you cheeky sod, catching them out again. And Andy from Gosbor is having a go about a Crazy Castle 4 review in PGB/43, where they said Mario hasn't made it to a fourth version of a game. Andy's right, of course there was Super Mario Land 4 for the Game Boy. Finally, Alan from St. Helens is pointing out a mistake in a Banjo-Tooie Future Look article, where they got the fridge and washing machine mixed up in a screenshot caption. These things happen. Atau. Next up is Reshuffle. Sounds like there's some staff changes happening. Someone called Reshuffle is writing in about the frequent staff changes, wondering where everyone's gone, and what the story is. They mention Will's old haircut is getting good use on Paul's license photo, cryptic stuff. They're wondering if there's some mystery behind the departures. Below this are some pictures of the staff. Tim is now helming Arcade Magazine, just next door. James is still around doing senior ed things, whatever they are. Jess is now Ninty channel editor for Daily Radar, and Will is now at Rare, but they can't say what he's doing. Typical Rare secrecy. Finally, something strange. Someone spotted something odd in the Perfect Dark credits. There are screenshots of the credits, showing names like Dark Mark Reality Engineer, and C-Tex, with names like Richard Force 9 Gale, Mark Green, Alex Zorro, and Mark Wilson. The magazine asks, Greener doing a bit of extracurricular. Who knows what that means? Maybe some in joke. This page of the Club 64 mailbox, it's always good to see what the readers are thinking. Someone from Norway, Øyvind Stenland, is asking if there is a Dark Mark who works at Rare, or something like that. Then Charlie Dorks from Wokingham has found some amusing dialogue in Perfect Dark, where a guard cries for his best friend after you shoot him. Bit dramatic, even for Perfect Dark guards. Harry Stein is wondering about the lumps of cheese in Perfect Dark, asking if Rare are messing with our minds. Ed, the editor, just points him to page 108, for more weird stuff in games, which is fair enough, saves him explaining it all again. Billy Kavanagh from Earl Shilton thinks Nintendo Eclipse is a good name for the next console. Yeah, Eclipse, it's got a ring to it. Better than Starcube, Ed reckons, and I'd agree with him there. Then there's a little tip about keeping calcium levels up during combat, or not, which is a bit of a laugh. Moving on to Dream On, where readers pitch game ideas. Chris Parry from Brecon wants a Prohibition-era gangster game called Bootleggers 64. Sounds a bit like that Mac game Deathground. Ed says Martin thinks it sounds like Deathground 2, which did alright apparently. Richard Warner from Charlbury has a funny idea for Team 64 Racing. A kart racer set in the N64 Magazine offices, racing as the staff. They'd be in different vehicles, like the boss's car or even Neil's motorbike. And the goal is to become the editor. Ed jokes about Paul being in a camper van, Jude in a Fiat Bravo, and Mark in a trolley, which is a funny image to be fair. And there's a little pic of Deathground there, looks like a right moody gangster type on the cover. Ed's wondering if a mobster game would work on the N64, since Deathground was on the Mac. This page is the mailbox section, always a good bit for a laugh, and to see if your letter got in. Right at the top, someone's complaining about Andrea being in charge, James Smith from Essex, bit cheeky. Then there's some classic, I know where you live, banter, signed by the Dark Lord, from Castle of Torture, Yorkshire. Brilliant. Ed's replies are always top-notch. You poor thing Ed indeed. Someone called George is worried about being normal. Bless him. Then we've got Alistair Bowie with a Pokemon reference about his Mew killing Rattatas. Sounds like he needs a muzzle. Ed quality. Jamie Brooks is talking about the ability to urinate on enemies, in games being different, and Ed replies, and not particularly pleasant. Ed sums it up really. Nicola Newton is sticking up for Lita Ford, over Britney Spears and Kat Deely. Each to their own I suppose. Keith Adam got a fake Team Rocket card with his chips. Poor sod. Blimey. Ed. Anne-Marie Kelly reckons she's a resaholic, whatever that is. Junior Ewing is threatening Alan in the mag. That's not very nice. Ed. Julian Woods just needs to chill out. Sound advice. Ed. Classic mailbox stuff, really. Reading back it's still funny. Would you? Then there's a section called Cracked It, where someone, Tom Foreman, is comparing Joanna Dark to Joan of Arc, saying Rare might have borrowed ideas. Ed just says they declined to comment. Surprise, surprise. Richard Hollister is raving about a band called Shy Factory and their video being like GoldenEye, reckons it's worth checking out on their website, and that it's a 23 megabytes download. Imagine waiting for that back then. He also mentions multiplayer split screen like GoldenEye, and Ed says everyone in Team 64 smiled when they saw this video. Great stuff, you Canadian rockers. Bit of patriotism there from Ed. Finally, there's the So Tell Me This section where Carl Thompson from Manchester is asking a bunch of questions. First, about getting an N64 passport, which was a device to play Japanese games, and asking if it works with NBA Courtside 2, Harvest Moon, Fighter Destiny 2, and Snowboard Kids. They reckon you need to contact importers like CA Games or Project K, and it'll cost about £20. They say it works with Harvest Moon and NBA Courtside, and should work with the others, but they haven't tested them yet. Next question is about new NFL games on N64, and they mention Acclaim's NFL Quarterback Club 2001 and Midway's NFL Blitz 2001 are due out soon, but no PAL versions of either expected. Lastly, he asks if Rare will release any Battletoads games on N64, Dolphin, or GBA. They say it's unlikely for N64 or Dolphin, but keep an eye out for classics like Battletoads on the GBA. Alex Jenkins from Exeter is asking if the Game Boy Advance can link up to the Dolphin, which was the GameCube's codename, and if the GBA will have 3D graphics. They confirm the GBA will link to Dolphin with a special cable, and speculate about dual Dolphin/GBA versions of Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil. Very exciting at the time, the possibilities seemed endless. They also say GBA will have 32-bit graphics, and yes, it will be capable of 3D. Good times thinking about all that potential back then. This page is all about reader submissions, and some creative ideas for Nintendo's next console, Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube of course. Dolphin Factory, it's called, and folks have sent in their drawings of what they think it will look like. One chap, Tim Alltimes, reckons it'll be a freedom-boosting cordless controller affair, coming in 6 colors with a built-in modem. Sounds ambitious, doesn't it? Another submission by Sam Underhill is going proper old school, taking DVDs and N64 carts. Blimey, hedging his bets there. He wants to keep the N64 controller too, but throw in internet. Fair play for thinking outside the box. Finally, Andy Lyth from Leeds is dreaming of multiplayer heaven with 8 controller ports. 8! And Game Boy Advance ports, internet, a radio, even. They were really going for it, weren't they? It's funny to see these ideas now, knowing what the GameCube actually ended up like. Then over on the right side, N64 board, it's all fan art. We've got Sarah Lynch from Sheffield with a Pokemon poster. A classic lineup of pocket monsters there. Then Jamie Mancini from Bedford has drawn Mario getting revenge on Pikachu. Bit of a Rustler-style smackdown apparently for pinching fans. Silly stuff. A charming comment from Professor Oak, as John Kendall of Bishop Stortford puts it, is featured. He's having a proper go at the magazine writers, saying he could do better. Cheeky. Nick West from Shoreham sent in another Pokemon picture. A right old mix of them all. And lastly, Ugo Nuosu from Liverpool has done a Zelda pic with Link and Ganondorf. Proper dramatic stuff. It's always good to see what readers send in, some talented people out there. This page is all about becoming a picture-taking pro in Pokemon Snap. Remember Pokemon Snap? It was a bit of a unique one, a photography game with Pokemon, took its sweet time to get here after Japan. Typical Nintendo Europe, eh? This article is basically your guide to taking the best possible photos in the game. Juju. Apparently, in issue 45, they reviewed it and gave it a solid 80%. The quote says it was highly original and great fun, but they were moaning about wanting more monsters. Reviewers, always wanting more. Then it dives into the equipment you get from Professor Oak. Classic Professor Oak, always got something up his sleeve. First up is Pokemon food. Looks like an apple, but Oak insists it's apple-shaped Pokemon food. Apparently you can use it to make Pokemon smile or bop them on the head for laughs. Next we've got the Pester Ball, which explodes in purple smoke and is good for stunning Pokemon. They say it can bring angry monsters running. Sounds chaotic. Then there's the Pokemon Flute. Apparently, there are 3 songs you can play with the bottom C buttons, even makes grumpy Pokemon dance, and you get bonus points for the best dance moves. Lastly, the Rush Engine. Fit this to your 01 buggy after completing 6 levels, and you can speed around for close-ups of fast-moving Pokemon or just crash into them if you fancy. Good old Pokemon Snap, simple but addictive. This page is all about getting the perfect snaps in Pokemon Snap, a game that was quite the novelty back then, wasn't it? Professor Oak's masterclass is breaking down his scoring criteria. Apparently he's fussy. He's got sections on special photos, liking those floating types like Pikachu and Magmar, so you need to use tricks to impress him. Size is obvious, getting close for more points, but don't get too close, or he'll moan about bits being out of frame. Pose is about getting Pokemon staring straight at the camera for a decent score, around 800 points, but if they're dancing or eating you can get even more, up to 1000. Finally, Friends covers having multiple Pokemon of the same type in a shot for bonus points, but he says not to expect too many extra points for that. Then there's a section on photo quality, a 6-step guide to getting prize-winning photos. It advises you to snap everything, even useless shots, as you might trigger something special. Number 2 is about not just hammering the camera button, aim for 1 or 2 good shots of each Pokemon. Tip 3 says it's easier to check your surroundings with the Z button depressed, so don't always hold R. Number 4, after using items like food or pestaballs, hold R to be ready for magical things happening. Number 5 talks about spinning the camera with left C and right C, and top C flicks you forward, useful for catching them all. And lastly, number 6, with fast Pokemon, don't wait for the Pokeball in the viewfinder to light up, just use your instinct. Be a photographer. Lastly, there's the 01 bit about getting around in Professor Oak's buggy. It says it's a bit fixed after the beach, but you can still steer left and right with the analog stick, handy for getting close and avoiding crashes. It mentions the rush button, which is the engine button, for getting into position or bashing into Pokemon if you're feeling a bit cheeky. It also suggests slowing down the buggy by facing backwards. So yeah, all about mastering Pokemon Snap for top scores from the professor. Good times. This page is all about Pokemon Snap classic stuff. It's a guide to getting good pictures on the beach level. They're giving tips for getting top scores with different Pokemon like Chansey and Eevee if you slap Chansey with an apple, bit harsh, but whatever. You can get Meowth by knocking him off a ledge with a pester ball, and then he'll do a little dance apparently, for points of course. Kangaskhan is in there, saying you need to basically annoy him with a pester ball, or apple, to get a good photo, and there's tips for Snorlax, Doduo, Magikarp and Scyther. Professor Oak pops up with some advice about Pikachu on a surfboard, and some rock shaped like a Kingler. Standard stuff for getting the best snaps in Pokemon Snap really. It was a pretty unique game at the time, taking photos of Pokemon, wasn't it? Good bit of fun. This page is all about getting picture perfect in Pokemon Snap, specifically in the tunnel level. It's a walkthrough showing you the best spots and tricks to get top points. First up, they're telling you how to get a Magneton shot by chucking apples at Magnemites, so they stop shielding themselves and you can lure them together. Crafty stuff. Then it's Diglett and Dugtrio, easy enough to snap but they pop up all over the place. You need to do it 6 times to get a good group shot of Dugtrio apparently. So, next, there's hatching the egg in the cave with Pikachu and the Pokéflute to get Zapdos, and they reckon you can get maximum points if you time it right as Zapdos appears. Then it's Haunters floating about in purple circles. You've got to use the 01 and press Z and A as they pass by. Sounds fiddly but worth it for the points. A Zubat is next, flying through a door. They say it's not the best pick, but you can get a decent one if you're quick. Then it's those Electrode Blighters. You've got to bounce an apple off their shiny skin to wipe the grin off their faces. Bonus points if you snap them just before they blow. Cheeky. There's also a Magikarp hanging about near the generator. Apparently Professor Oak is pleased if you get a photo of that fishy fella. And then Electabuzz, you need to bop them with an apple to get them angry for a good picture, but only if you've hatched Zapdos earlier, which is a bit of a faff. Kakunas are mentioned near the first door drop down. You need to jam yourself against Electrodes and Electabuzz to delay your progress to even see them and fit them all in the photo. Finally, there's Pikachu again, where you need to take 2 photos in succession, and he'll climb on top of a rolling Electrode for a top scoring picture. Attention-seeking little electric rodent, isn't he? They even mention Professor Oak's secret path and Pika pose. They really went all out on this level, didn't they? Looks like they're guiding you through the whole level to maximize your score, reminding you to use apples and the 01 to get the best Pokemon snaps. Pretty standard stuff for a guide back then, gotta get those high scores. This page is all about the volcano level in Pokemon Snap. Right then, classic. It's giving you the inside scoop on how to bag some top scores in this fiery level. So if you're struggling to get past that 60 mark on your film roll, this is for you. Great. First up, they're showing you how to get a good shot of Charmeleon evolving into Charizard. Bit of lava required for that, naturally. Then it's on to Growlithe and Arcanine. Apparently bombing them with pester balls will make them shake out fiery embers. Gotta be quick with the camera for that one. There's a Magmar and Charmander bit, chuck an apple between them to set Charmander ablaze, evolving him as well. Seems evolution is the key to a good photo score here. Then they show how to get Moltres, knocking an egg into lava, always a good plan, and apparently a Moltres pops out. Vulpix are there too, telling you to go slow to get them all together for a group shot, and to use apples to get their attention. Very cute, apparently, makes you sick with cuteness. And finally Rapidash, they come galloping at you at the start, use left C to snap the first one, or the pair, poses key apparently, for a higher score. Oh, and a Professor Oak sign bit at the bottom, bit of a secret tip here. Apparently, if you lob a pester ball into a smoking pit on your left as you start, a coughing-shaped purple cloud will appear. Coughing smoke, get it? Professor Oak's jokes aren't always the best, are they? But fair play, that's a neat little secret to find. Volcano level, always a bit of a hot one, literally. This page is from Club 64 and it's all about how to get the best snaps in Pokemon Snap, this time focusing on the river level. Looks like they're giving you tips to get better photos of different Pokemon for higher scores. Riddendorkers. Starting at the top left, they're showing you how to get a Pikachu photo. Seems you just need to snap it as it pops its head out of a log. Sounds simple enough. Then there's a Cloyster, you gotta use the rush engine to get close, it's spinning and rising out of the water. Classic Cloyster. Gaby. Moving down, they're talking about Psyduck, poor sod. Apparently you need to chuck an apple at its head to make it burst out of the water, and then snap it mid-leap. A bit mean to Psyduck, but for points, eh? Next up are Slowpokes. You gotta lure them onto wooden slabs with fruit, and apparently they morph into Slowbros. Never quite figured that out myself back in the day. The loss. Then there's Metapod, you need to use pester balls to get a group of them together for a good shot. Vileplume is next, hiding in a smoking stack. You need to use the Pokemon flute to get it out and doing backflips for even more points. Gee. Shelder are floating above the river, you need the rush engine to reach them and get a close-up of one with others behind it. Poliwags are hiding in foliage, you need to bash the first two with pester bombs to get them to dive into the depths. Bulbasaur needs some trickery, you have to bash a vertical log with a pester ball, then place an apple nearby to make two Bulbasaurs appear, and do a tipping dance. Sounds a bit convoluted, even for Pokemon Snap. Rebuzz. Bulbasaur. Finally, there's Magikarp. You need to drop apples into the rapids to get them leaping out of the water, and you gotta catch them mid-jump for good points. Classic useless Magikarp actually doing something for once. P. Heggy. So yeah, a pretty comprehensive guide to getting top scores on the river level in Pokemon Snap. Always good to have these tips, especially for a game that's all about getting that perfect shot. The next page is all about Perfect Dark, right then at the peak of its popularity. Headlined, How to Rise to the Challenge in Perfect Dark. It's offering some tips for the sim challenges, saying they'll seriously test the best. Alan Madrell's written this piece. Always a reliable bloke. They're referencing a previous review where they gave it a stonking 96%, calling it supremely playable, dauntingly huge, and even claiming if you could only have one N64 game, this would be it, no contest. Strong words indeed. They reckon it starts off easy enough if you've played GoldenEye multiplayer, which of course everyone had, but then it gets properly challenging later on. Trainer. They suggest knowing the best weapons and radar and control systems are key, and that the sim enemies are semi-intelligent, so you can't just run in guns blazing, you need to think about their movement. There are a couple of screenshots showing in-game action, looking suitably moody and futuristic. It's a good reminder of how deep Perfect Dark was, especially compared to most shooters at the time. Getting all those stars in the challenges was a proper test of skill, not just luck. This page is all about getting better at Perfect Dark, and a bit of GoldenEye multiplayer thrown in for good measure. Right at the top, Joe's Essential Selection it says, which sounds a bit poncy doesn't it, but fair enough. First up is Daily Radar, giving tips for the GoldenEye 007 multiplayer radar. It's explaining the basics for anyone who's somehow missed out on months of GoldenEye madness. Explains how you're the dot in the middle, and the other dots are players, a dot above means they're in front, and arrows are for above or below you. Pretty basic stuff really if you've played it at all, but maybe someone out there needed it explained. Good reminder to not shoot your teammates in team games as well, or you'll get a kicking from your mates, or yourself, in the game of course. Then there's Don't Waste Time, which is focused on Perfect Dark's challenges. It's telling you to learn how the challenges work, particularly combat, King of the Hill and Capture the Case. It's pretty standard advice. Know the rules, learn the maps. For the knowledge, it recommends going into advanced setup, removing the sims, and wandering around the levels on your own to learn the layout and weapon placements. Bit of a sneaky tactic for getting ahead of the game. Nayu. Its Life Gym is about the sims in Perfect Dark. It says they behave differently from human players. Even the weak sims are still quite good if you wander into their line of sight. If they've got a decent weapon, they can be a real pain, so don't get too cocky apparently. And if you're facing more than one sim, you better be shielded up. They can gang up on you, which is true, the cheeky sods. Finally, extra protection suggests a trick for combat challenges. Grab a shield, stand where you picked it up, and when a sim comes at you and the shield respawns, grab it again for a refresher shield as you take damage. Hardly sportsmanlike, it jokes, but against sims, who cares, eh? So yeah, it's a quick guide to getting better at Perfect Dark challenges, and a little GoldenEye multiplayer refresher. Handy tips for the time, especially if you were tackling those Perfect Dark challenges. This page is all about the challenges in Perfect Dark, breaking down some multiplayer scenarios for players to get their teeth into. It's like a bit of homework to get you up to speed with Perfect Dark's multiplayer, especially if you're a GoldenEye veteran and might think you know it all already. They're suggesting these challenges will unlock more options in the multiplayer setup, which was a big deal at the time. Loads of customization for deathmatches and stuff. Challenge 1 is a basic combat scenario on Skidar. Get 4 kills in 5 minutes using the radar to your advantage. Standard stuff really, good for beginners to get used to the radar changes in Perfect Dark compared to GoldenEye with the up/down arrow. Challenge 2 is more combat, this time on Area 52, asking you to get 6 kills in 5 minutes. They mention using the shutter windows and proximity self-destruct on the dragon weapon. Clever tactics for tight corridors. Challenge 3 moves onto pipes with 2 sims, needing 8 kills in 10 minutes. They suggest using mines, the AR-34 automatic rifle, and finding a good vantage point for sniping, classic multiplayer strategy. Challenge 4 is King of the Hill on Skedar. Rule the hill 4 times in 10 minutes. They recommend using a shield and the Avenger weapon, a powerful combo for hill control. Challenge 5 is back to combat on Complex, get 10 kills in 10 minutes. They suggest using the Farsight, that's the alien sniper rifle, and the secondary target locator, to flush out distant prey. Complex was a pretty dark map if I recall, perfect for the Farsight. Challenge 6 is, hold the briefcase on Area 52, get 6 points in 10 minutes. They mention shields and the K7 weapon, so defensive tactics are key here, camping spots near the window for an advantage. Challenge 7 is King of the Hill again, this time on Warehouse, rule the hill 5 times in 10 minutes. They recommend shields, the Cyclone, and using the corridor by the crate-filled room, and being sneaky with grenades. Finally, Challenge 8 is, hold the briefcase on Skenadar, get 3 points in 10 minutes. Again, shields are key, and they suggest avoiding close quarters fights, and sticking to the Super Dragon. A powerful weapon for sure. Overall, these challenges are a good way to get to grips with Perfect Dark's multiplayer, which was a step up from GoldenEye, in terms of complexity and options. It's like they're gently guiding you through the basics before unleashing you on the full multiplayer mayhem. This page of Club 64 is all about getting better at Perfect Dark multiplayer. Right then, let's have a look. They've got these little challenges set up, see? Numbered 9 through 16. Do new. Challenge number 9, 1-hit kills on Ravine. They're saying get 10 kills or the most you can in 10 minutes. They're pointing out that laptop gun, remember that beast? Yeah, its secondary function is proper useful here. Next up, number 10 is Hacker Central, on Temple. 2 hacks or the most in 10 minutes. Sneaky tip to use remote mines on the computer if the sim gets there first. Classic. Number 11, King of the Hill on Complex. Rule the hill 10 times or again, most in 10 minutes. They're suggesting the shield in the middle room is handy, and to grab the K7 Avenger from the balcony. Good shout, that K7 was a beast in its own right. Number 12, Slow-mo combat on Skedar. 3 kills or the most in 10 minutes. They're having a laugh saying the sniper rifle is useless in slow-mo, bit obvious that in it. Grenade launcher and Super Dragon are the way to go here, especially around those Skedar pillars. Oindu. Number 13 is back to 1-hit kills, this time on G5 building. Another 10 kills, almost in 10 minutes. They're telling you to get up high on the walkways, for a good vantage point with the Reaper. And again, mentioning the laptop gun's secondary function. It was a bit of a game changer, that gun. Tell it go. Number 14 is See the Sea. Capture the case mode on Area 52. 10 points or most in 10 minutes. Tricky tip here. Hover near your yellow base. Let the enemy grab the case. Then nick it off them and run back while cloaked. Cheeky, but effective. Number 15. Hold the briefcase on grid. 10 points or most in 10 minutes. They're saying you're vulnerable with the case in the open, so ferret around a bit, and the Devastator is good for damage control. Handy for clearing out those grid corridors. Morrington in it. Finally, number 16, no radar on Felicity. 10 kills or most in 10 minutes. Down the stairs from the lab's proximity mines, but they admit they're tricky to use. Super Dragon is your friend again, close up or chucking grenades. Always reliable, the Super Dragon. Kimidu. And that's your lot. Just some Perfect Dark multiplayer tips to get you going, really. Good game, Perfect Dark. Still holds up alright even now. This page is all about GoldenEye 007 tips. A proper classic that. Right then, we're diving into How To Club, and it's techno crazy this month, talking about all the wonderful gadgets in GoldenEye. They're saying weapons like rockets are powerful, but you gotta be careful not to blow yourself up, especially if someone's nearby. Good advice. Many a time I've taken myself out with a badly aimed rocket on that game. First up, number 17 is King of the Hill on Temple, with one sim. The tip is to rule the hill 10 times or the most in 10 minutes. Apparently if the Slayer is just standing still, they're probably trying to guide a rocket down your throat. Charming. Best thing to do is grab the hill quick and perform the same trick back on them. Fair enough. Next, number 18. King of the Hill again, but this time Villa with 2 sims. Again, rule the hill 10 times or the most in 10 minutes. For this one, they're saying to forget going head to head with the Magayans because they'll likely win. Instead, tranquilize them before trying to shoot them down, and sneak up with a cloak for maximum effect. Laptop gun for defense. Sounds about right for Villa. Number 19. Fast movement on G5 with 2 sims. Get 10 kills or the most in 10 minutes. They're saying don't bother with rocket launchers, just grab a farsight and combat boost to stop enemies getting too close. Forget getting personal, shields make that inadvisable, they reckon. When farsighting, make sure you're in a secure area. Sensible. Warrington Youth. Number 20. One-hit kills on sewers with 1 sim. Get 10 team kills, or the most in 10 minutes. If you haven't mastered the radar by now, they say it's nasty. The best way to protect your teammate is to work out where the sim is, and take the shortest route there. You must have the shield from before you go though. Get ahead, then play defensive. Standard sewers tactics really. Number 21. Hacker Central on grid with 1 sim. Get 10 points or the most in 10 minutes. This one's supposed to be hard. Hide by the computer, wait for Joe to decloak before giving her a sound thrashing. Simply repeat until 10 minutes are up. A Reaper is a good choice for this challenge, they suggest. Straightforward enough. Finally, number 22. H the B1 hit kills on base with 2 sims. Get 10 points or the most in 10 minutes. Hardcore. First, grab the shield. It's on the ramp between the rooms stuffed with crates. Then get a K7, and wait around a corner for the sims to appear. They stick close together, so you'll need to blast like a loon. When you have the case, simply hide yourself away in a dead end and wait. Classic base strategy. Number 23. Slow-mo combat on complex with 2 sims. Get 2 kills, or the most in 10 minutes. Always locate the shield early on. Then get a laptop gun from the balcony above the room with ramps, and pick up an RCP-120 from beside the ramp. Use its cloaking device to sneak up behind a sim, and then teach them a thing, or 120. Cheeky. Lastly, number 24. See the C on Fortress with 4 sims. Get 9 points. Cripes. Combined with a gold magnum, that tranquilizer trick may be useful here. It's also worth having a Super Dragon, or Devastator on hand for self-defense, as you proceed over the ramps. Lurk by your base, waiting for them to make a move, then dash for the case while they're a man down. Sounds like a proper Fortress standoff. So yeah, a whole page of GoldenEye tips. Takes me back. Good times. This page from Club 64 is all about how to conquer those tough dark challenges in Perfect Dark. It's giving you the lowdown on how to best tackle these scenarios, and it's certainly needed because those dark sims can be proper cheeky. The guide is broken down into challenges numbered 25 through 30. Challenge 25 is combat on the ravine map with 2 sims. It mentions a wise man guarding an area and cloaked sims, suggesting using the farsight rifle and being aware of the surroundings and sound. Challenge 26 is King of the Hill on ruins, again with 2 sims. The advice here is to forget about distant hills and set up sentry laptops in vital spots. It also suggests grabbing cyclones for close quarters combat. Challenge 27 moves to Hacker Central on sewers with just 1 sim, and it's all about getting 10 points, or the most, within 10 minutes. Apparently rocket launchers make it hard to score, so you're advised to wait outside the computer area and pounce on any sim foolish enough to try. Sounds a bit cowardly, but hey, whatever works. Challenge 28 is See the Sea on Villa with 2 sims, aiming for 9 points or the most in 10 minutes. This one highlights the difficulty of Villa with dark sims, and advises focusing on defending your own case. It suggests planning routes carefully, and using the radar to stay away from enemies. If all else fails, just wait and aim for a draw. Very defensive strategy. 1K. Challenge 29 is back to combat, this time on G5 with 2 sims. This is described as straight combat against 2 of the best. It recommends using the dragon's proximity self-destruct in the doorway to the upper balcony and then finishing them off with a cyclone if needed, though it downplays the cyclone's effectiveness against these tough foes. Finally, Challenge 30 is King of the Hill on Skidar, again with 2 sims and aiming for 10 points. It points out that your teammate isn't much help, so you need to draw enemy simfire. The advice is to grab a mauler and use charge-up shots, punching holes in their shields first. It suggests finding a defensible spot and watching the radar carefully. There's also a Dark Forces box at the top, reminding you that these tougher sims are smart and won't make mistakes, so you can't rely on weak weapons or bad tactics. They even suggest that GoldenEye masters might get humbled if they're not careful. A bit dramatic, but you get the point. So yeah, it's a pretty standard how-to guide for tackling the tougher end of Perfect Dark. Good to see some tips for these challenges, as they could be properly brutal back in the day, especially against those dark sims who seem to read your mind. This page shows some handy cheat codes for StarCraft 64 and Perfect Dark. Right then, StarCraft 64, remember that? They've got a few cheats listed here for it, things like buy anything, which sounds pretty useful, and a cheat screen if you want to dive right in. There's also cash and gas for resources, all research to unlock everything, and mega build for faster construction. Essential stuff when you're getting hammered by Zerg. They've even got codes to turn off Fog of War, Info Mana, God Mode, and Open Tech Tree. Faster building is mentioned too, just hammering B apparently. Then they've got Perfect Dark, everyone loved that back then. Complete challenges easily. Well, that sounds like a bit of a cheat, doesn't it? Apparently you can use 2 controllers to cheese the challenges. And then there's Human Pincushion, which sounds a bit gruesome, doesn't it? It's some trick with the Callisto in the bathroom on Felicity to rack up points. Sneaky! These tips pages were always a godsend back in the day if you got stuck, weren't they? This page is a right corker, isn't it? Classic N64 Magazine tips page. We're kicking off with WrestleMania 2000, and they're giving us a bit of career advice. Seems like if you're playing career mode, you want to avoid losing your belt to Vince McMahon before WrestleMania. Apparently it messes up your chances of getting a title shot at WrestleMania itself. Who knew, eh? It's all about surviving the Royal Rumble to get your big moment, apparently. Then we're on to Kirby 64. The Crystal Shards, bless him. Always a cute fella. They're saying if you complete the game you unlock a sound test, which was always a nice little bonus back then. And if you grab all the crystals, you get bonus modes, boss battle and movie viewer. For those struggling, there's a sneaky trick for infinite lives. You grab the first star, pause, hit, try again, go back to the level, grab the star again and repeat. Bit of a faff, but hey, infinite lives. Lastly, we've got a classic tip for Quake 2. John Romero's Dark Shooter still holds up today, you know. They're talking about a Twists level deathmatch setup, with specific passwords for different difficulties. You've got FBBCVBBF7 for deathmatch, then for medium you want FLBCZBB9, and for hard it's FVBSLBBB or 7VBC3BB5. Also some multiplayer cheats, S3T1NFTNIT3, SH0TSF for infinite ammo, and S3TLOWGRVITY for low gravity, though that last one is missing some bits. And finally, for extra costume colors, there's S3TC00L, C0L0RS. Again, a bit incomplete. Good old cheat codes, eh? Those were the days. This page showcases the reader's top 15 tips, classic stuff from Club 64 in N64 Magazine. It's all about getting a bit of an edge in your favorite games, straight from the mouths of fellow gamers. Looks like Perfect Dark is dominating the cheat scene this month, no surprises there, eh? They've got a tip for messing with the laptop gun on the firing range, another for slowing down the Slayer rocket handy for those tight spots. Someone else has figured out how to get X-ray vision, and there's even a secret room to find in Area 51. Rescue. And another tip for causing chaos with the cloaking device, and jamming doors in the Institute level. Seems like Perfect Dark was ripe for exploration, wasn't it? Tissy-ha. Ridge Racer 64 gets a look in too, with a tip for getting the Z-Type Screamin' Eagle or Ultra 64 car in Grand Prix, and another one for unlocking the Zero Agent car in multiplayer. Always good to have those extra rides. Then there's a WrestleMania 2000 tip for a Blood Mist special move, Charming. Tony Hawk skateboarding is featured with a perfect balance cheat and a way to go invisible. Plus a tip for grinding the Hubba hideout in San Francisco. Classic Tony Hawk's Baygay. Snowboard Kids gets a mention for unlocking all characters, tracks and boards, which is always a winner. Saves you grinding through the game. And finally, Donkey Kong 64 has a tip for finding a rainbow coin on an Earth hill. Worth 5 to each Kong. Every little helps in that game. At the bottom there's a form to send in your own tips, asking for the game and the tip itself, with spaces for your details to send it in by post. Proper old school style. In it, they even mention a cheat of the month slot, with an extra special prize. Probably a pin badge if you're lucky. Good times. This page is from Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, which was a regular feature in the mag back in the day for gamers who were stuck on a puzzle or needed some tips. It's presented like a doctor's surgery for games, a bit of a humorous angle. First up, we have a question about Donkey Kong 64. Someone called Chris from Surrey is after Diddy's minecart ride in Jungle Japes. Dr. Kits, in his typical style, gives a pretty detailed walkthrough involving chimpy charges, clumps, and hitting switches, and tells Chris to enjoy the stunning minigame. DK64 was massive at the time, a real collectathon, so people getting lost in it was quite common. Minecart sections were always a bit of a pain to find if you missed the entrance. Chew. Next, Robert from Norwich is asking about Blastcore and stopping a truck on a bridge. Blastcore was a bit of a different game for Rare, all about destruction and clearing paths. Dr. Kits' advice is to shoot the bridge supports, obvious really when you think about it. Robert just needed to aim better, it seems. Arths. Then we have a question about spring cleaning, which sounds like it could be from Banjo-Kazooie, maybe Tooie. The reader is stuck on getting the coffee maker's son to play. Dr. Kits suggests repeatedly drinking the coffee, which sounds typically obtuse, but these games often had weird logic. Barry from Dublin wants to know how to get the extra match types in WrestleMania 2000. Dr. Kits just shuts him down, saying all modes were in the final game and anyone saying otherwise is fibbing, and that blood was taken out for the UK version. A bit blunt but to the point. WrestleMania 2000 was a decent wrestling game on the N64, but the blood thing was always a bit of a pain for us in the UK. Simon in Edinburgh is asking about the speed walk in Gobi's Valley, in Banjo-Kazooie. Dr. Kits tells him to go to the pyramid and speak to Bottles inside to get the running shoes, and mentions a puzzle piece nearby involving switches and swimming. Banjo-Kazooie was full of these little hidden bits and pieces. Bottles was always the go-to guy for new moves. Christopher from Ashton-under-Lyme wants to unlock Tweak in South Park Rally. Dr. Kits simply says, easy to find, which isn't much help, is it? South Park Rally was a kart racer. Capitalizing on the South Park craze, it was alright, but not amazing. Ashley from Sleaford is looking for a specialist magazine to help with Jet Force Gemini. Dr. Kit says to ask Fernando on Jet Force Gemini. Again, not really helpful if you're genuinely stuck, but these answers were often a bit tongue-in-cheek. Jet Force Gemini was another Rare game, a bit of a sci-fi shooter, quite challenging and had some cool weapons. Finally, there's a question about Vigilante 8, Second Offense and the Drifters mission. But there's no answer given for that one, maybe ran out of space. Vigilante 8 was a fun car combat game, a bit like Twisted Metal but with a 70s vibe. At the bottom there's a Got a Gaming Query section and a form to send in your questions to Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, complete with an address for N64 Magazine in Bath and instructions to cut out and send it in. Pretty standard stuff for magazines back then, getting reader interaction. This page is all about challenges in Perfect Dark. Right then, good stuff. They've got 8 challenges in total apparently. Proper test of skill this. They're calling it Game On. Bit bold, isn't it? Anyway, they're showing off 4 of them here, all Perfect Dark based. First one, spin the box. Someone called Jan from Finland came up with that. You've got to spin a hovercrate in the Carrington Institute. Madness. Medals are based on how many spins you can get. Warrington. Next up is Crash the Bike. Jake from Glasgow's idea, involving hoverbikes this time. You have to launch off a ramp and crash your bike as far as possible, aiming for different landmarks to get your medals. Sounds like a bit of a laugh, to be fair. Then there's Where's My Gun? David from Coalhill sent this one in. This is about disarming enemies using only the Falcon pistol and cheats like invincibility and slow-mo. Cheating to win, eh? Medals based on how many you can disarm. Yegi. Lastly on this page is Skidar Sunday, Rob from Dublin's Challenge. This one's a bit tougher sounding. You have to take on the first 2 Skidar levels using only your fists. Proper bare-knuckle brawl. Medals for different difficulty levels you manage it on. Sounds like a right pain in the backside on Perfect Agent, but fair play if you can manage it. These challenges, they were always a bit of fun in mags back then, weren't they? Testing your skills and bragging rights and all that. This page is showcasing the Club 64 8 challenges to test the best section. Classic N64 Magazine stuff right here. It's got 4 different game challenges submitted by readers, which was always a good bit of fun to see what nutty things people came up with. First up is GoldenEye 007 with Taser Tag. This bloke, David Johnson, wants you to play in Facility, which is a pretty iconic level, and use the taser. The challenge is to only use the taser on one scientist, after getting rid of all the other guards. Then you chase him, and the medal you get depends on where you finally zap him, first door, second door, or near the lockers. Pretty sneaky, I like it. Burakus. Then there's Jet Force Gemini with Shuriken Shoot. Sam Rowland sent this one in. For this you're playing as Lupus, the dog, in the castle level, and you've got to use shurikens. Basically you run around and grab as many shurikens as you can find, and your medal is based on the total number you collect. 10, 5 or 3, for gold, silver and bronze. Jet Force Gemini was a bit of a looker at the time. All those colourful explosions, maybe a bit too much at times. Next we've got Super Smash Bros. With platforms showing. Callum Conn came up with this one. You're Captain Falcon on Dreamland, which is a good shout for a platformy level. The idea is to hit your opponent off the platforms without touching the ground yourself. You get points for hitting them, and lose points for hitting the same person twice in a row, or hitting yourself. Medals are based on your total points, 40 for gold, 20 for silver and 10 for bronze. Smash Bros was a proper multiplayer classic back then. Chaotic fun. Finally, Super Mario 64 with skydiving. Justin Carson sent this one in. This is a bit different. You need to have unlocked the Everlasting Stairs level. That's the one you go up to get to Bowser, in the second or third world. You have to get to the top, and then dive off, trying to land on paintings. Medals depend on which numbered painting you manage to land on. Painting number 4 for gold, 3 for silver, and 2 for bronze. Mario 64, what a game, still holds up brilliantly. At the bottom, there's a Game On section asking readers to send in their own weird and wonderful ways of playing games. They are particularly after challenges for Perfect Dark, International Track and Field 2000, Pokemon Stadium and Operation Winback. If they print your challenge, you get a flashy N64 pin badge. Not bad, eh? And they give an address to send your ideas to. Game On, N64 Magazine at their office in Bath. Right then, might have to dust off the old N64 and have a go at some of these. This page, titled Mindgam, takes a look into the minds of N64 game developers, written by Mark Green. It starts off by describing the stereotypical developer's working environment back then. A dark room, PC, flickering monitor, and endless hours fueled by coffee and Kit Kats. Apparently, this kind of environment is the reason behind some of the more bizarre and quirky moments we saw in N64 games like Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon. Then there's a section called Choice Words with quotes from developers. First up is Eric Cahan from Titus, who, bless him, is bigging up Superman 64 as really original and really cool to play, and even says its multiplayer is better than GoldenEye. Righto. Next, Graham Wren from Natsume talks about Legend of the River King, mentioning these totally bonkers puzzles involving women, bears and giving you a teacup. Sounds like your typical RPG logic, I suppose. Norsa Hazmek. David Deanspear from Acclaim Austin is quoted talking about proximity fragmentation mines in Turok 3, alongside a screenshot of Turok blasting some monster. Eugene Jarvis from Cruisin' World talks about game responsiveness and physics, which is classic arcade racer talk really. Jules Watcham from Iggy's Wrecking Balls imagines kids kicking rabbits while climbing mountains in games, which is a bit dark, innit? And then Deanspear is back again, saying he could kick somebody's face in if he wanted to, but it's more fun to live well, whilst also admitting he still sometimes wants to kick the crap out of someone. Bit of a nutter, eh? There's also a screenshot of Superman 64 looking as janky as you remember. It's a bit of a laugh reading their thoughts from back then. This page in N64 Magazine is all about little hidden secrets and Easter eggs in games. They've called it Mind Games. First up is Beardy Skywalker for Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Apparently there's a cheat code to give Luke Skywalker a beard, which is a bit of a laugh. They say it was a developer's late-night idea, and was slipped in with other things. They had to check with Lucasfilm to put their own faces in, which is fair enough. Wouldn't want to incur George Lucas's wrath, would you? Next we have Saddam Hussein's face in South Park Rally. You can get a power-up, and Saddam Hussein's face fills the screen, apparently to horrifying effect. They wanted to use faces from the Spookavision segments from South Park, but licensing was a pain. They tried Bill Clinton and other staff members, and Acclaim said Saddam was okay in the end, even though they were worried about upsetting Iraq. Shows how much they cared back then, eh? Then it's 1970s Tiger Woods in Cyber Tiger. This one's a hidden feature, where Tiger Woods and others are dressed in full 70s and 80s gear. Apparently, they saw an old clip of Tiger Woods as a kid on the Ed Sullivan Show, and thought it was funny, with the bell-bottoms and afro. They even used golf school footage of him at 13. They say the producer liked it, although some features, like a Titanic sinking in a giant lake, were cut for being too on the edge. Finally, there's Fat Bird on a Swing in Glover. If you wander northeast in Glover's hub world, you'll find this massive bird on a swing. The concept artist designed the hub with wacky stuff, and this bird started as a sweet thing, but gradually became more grotesque as time went on. They put it in the tree as decoration, and called it the Hub Chicken. Sounds about right for a game like Glover, full of oddness. This page of N64 Magazine dives into some of the more, shall we say, interesting design choices in games. First up, we've got Pig Surfing from Earthworm Jim 3D. Apparently, old Jimbo is now riding a pig around. The developers, say it was supposed to be sausage surfing originally, but they plumped for pig surfing instead. Sounds a bit daft, doesn't it? Then we've got Demon in a bunny suit from that Xena game. Despair, who's supposed to be some fearsome demon, is running around in a bunny suit. Sapphire, the developers, thought it'd be funny. I suppose it is a bit, in a weird way. Next it's Dancing Dinosaurs for Turok 2. Yeah, that's right, disco mode in Turok 2. Lost Lands inhabitants doing the jig. Acclaim Austin, who made the game, said they were a bit knackered and dreamt it up. They even mention a nude mode that didn't make the cut, which sounds about right for Turok. Lastly, we have Exploding Sheep from Worms Armageddon. Well, it's worms, innit? Exploding sheep are just classic Worms silliness. Team 17 say people like sheep and explosions, so why not? They even had to tone down some of the exploding stuff for the US censors, apparently. All in all, a page showcasing some of the more bonkers moments in N64 gaming. Good stuff, really. This page is all about mind games and the wonderful world of Rare, classic stuff for the N64 back then. Warra. First up is Spice Girls in Duke Nukem 0 Hour. It says that in Duke Nukem 0 Hour, you can find zombified versions of Posh, Sporty, and the rest of the girl band in shop windows, which is a bit of a laugh. Apparently it was parody, stemming from a general dislike of the band, and some other stuff that was a bit too close to the bone for the American testers, like a Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky gag that got cut. Good old British humour, eh? Loised. Next is Competitive Chicken, from Rocket, Robot on Wheels. This is about a chicken playing noughts and crosses in a midway game. Apparently, this is based on real-life carnival attractions, with expertly trained chickens that always win. They copied the idea to explain the controls in Rocket, and the developers at Sucker Punch thought it was funny to have presidents' heads involved somehow. Bit odd, but Rocket was a quirky game. Oh. Then we move on to the wonderful world of Rare, starting with Jimmy Savile in Jet Force Gemini. Apparently, if you finish Jet Force Gemini, you get a Jimmy Savile moment, described as bizarre but hilarious. The original ending was going to have a tear fall from Floyd's eye before he got blown to bits, but they changed it when they realized the designer could do a Jimmy Savile impression. Bit dark that in retrospect, isn't it, warriors? Hidden Cheese in Perfect Dark is next. They mention that there's a secret slab of cheese hidden in Perfect Dark, which was well known at the time. Rare quoted saying they were told to put it in, but weren't told why. They just stuck it in an abandoned cheat system and left it at that. Typical Rare, doing things just because. Then it's Chemistry Sets in GoldenEye 007. Apparently, if you look up in the corner room of the facility level in GoldenEye, you can spot a small chemistry set hidden in an air vent. Rare's comment is that they put these little details in games because they like seeing them in other games. And sometimes, things just are. Always appreciated those little touches in GoldenEye. Finally, we have Fish Barbecues and Talking Toilets from Banjo-Kazooie. For Fish Barbecues in Banjo-Kazooie, you can witness Banjo throwing his goldfish onto a barbecue. Rare say it was either the goldfish or a roast Breagle, as Banjo didn't have anything else in his cupboards. They point out you never actually see the fish get eaten. And for Talking Toilets, they talk about Logo the toilet in Banjo-Kazooie. Rare says toilets are very important in everyday life, so it was about time someone put one in a game. Logo apparently threatened to flush himself until he's sick if he didn't get a part in Banjo-Tooie. Always loved the humor in Banjo-Kazooie. So yeah, a real mixed bag of bizarre and quirky bits from N64 games, mainly from Rare. Just the kind of stuff you expected back then. This page is all about hyping up the next issue of N64 Magazine. Looks like they've got the UK's first review of Mario Tennis incoming. Big deal at the time, as everyone was eager to get their hands on that one, especially after the buzz around the Game Boy Color version. They're calling it the N64's finest sports game, which is a bold claim, but to be fair, Nintendo sports titles were usually pretty solid back then. Plus, there's a promise of all the latest Nintendo news from Space World 2000. Mark's apparently flown off to Japan to get the official scoop on Dolphin, which we all know is the GameCube now, and the Game Boy Advance. They're saying they'll have all the details, specs, games, and importantly, those release dates we were all desperate for. So yeah, basically telling you to buy the next issue, if you want to know what's coming next from Nintendo. Typical magazine stuff. This page is issue 47 of the N64 magazine. Kirby 64 gets the tipped treatment, essential reading for boss strategies and power combos it seems. In the review section we have F1 Racing, StarCraft 64 Championship and Hercules. Decent games all of them if you were into that sort of thing. First Play features Pokemon Stadium 3, Mario Party 3 still under wraps it seems, with a big question mark where the screenshot should be, and Pokemon Puzzle League. This issue was on sale Thursday the 28th of September. A free double game guide is included, can't complain at free stuff, and tips for 2 top N64 titles. Looking ahead to next month in Planet 64 Game Boy, we can see previews of Harvest Moon 2, Pokemon Pinball, and a look at Mario Kart and Yoshi's Story on the upcoming Game Boy Advance, a decent lineup for handheld fans. Dated October 2000. This page is a bit of a cheeky one in it. It's a special feature called Joanna Dark v Lara Croft from N64 Magazine, and they're grilling the girlies on their gun habits. Bit laddish, as you'd expect from mags back then. It's all trigger-happy totty talk apparently. We've got Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark, described as clearly the choice of the connoisseur. She's up for nighttime raids and doesn't take lip from uppity fellow agents. They reckon N64 Magazine would dearly love to be her undercover contact. She says her aim is compromised if she shivers, so she wears a flexible suit and a hat. She wants a man who isn't annoying, intelligent enough to stand up for himself, and has a decent weapon. Night vision's useful, and she's made interesting new friends recently, some out of this world. There's a colleague she fancies too, apparently, but we shouldn't print that. Joanna's asked what she wears in the Antarctic, and she says a specially designed suit in off-white. For a rendezvous in a dark alley, she wants someone like Hodus, eh? And when asked about a girl's best friend if not diamonds, she says a gun. Romance on the horizon? Not really. Then we have Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. They call her a prime piece of totty, and noble filly. She's described as aloof, sassy and dressed to kill, always with her deadly pair of pistols. Lara says she'll wear her usual vest and shorts to the Antarctic, just running to keep warm. She's way too busy to be mucking around with that mystic stuff, but likes to keep a bit of mystery. She likes someone rich with an interest in archaeology and endangered species. Her girl's best friend? A pair of pistols. Romance? It's a bit awkward for me at the moment, as I'm currently trapped underneath a collapsed pyramid. Classic Lara. There are little picture boxes for each of them asking questions like, gals, you're on a thrilling, action-packed mission in the hostile and forbidding wastes of the Antarctic. What are you wearing? And, what kind of man would you like to rendezvous with in a darkened alley? Finally there's the verdict from Judge Conker presiding. That's Conker from Conker's Bad Fur Day, obviously. He reckons Lara's taste in clothes should keep Gus fellas interested, and that Joe likes a man with a big weapon. He'd be up for more laughs of an evening with Lara, and says he's off for a date with that Candy Kong. Bit of a perv, that Conker. There are screenshots of Joanna and Lara in their respective games dotted about too. Typical lads mag style from back then really, wasn't it? All a bit of fun comparing the two leading ladies of gaming at the time.